I don't know about you, but whenever this song plays, I feel nostalgic. I was one of the kids who grew up watching Winx Club. It was one of the shows that introduced me to the Mahou Shoujo genre. It all started when one day I picked up a DVD case of The Secret of the Lost Kingdom and quite enjoyed it. So when I discovered that the same characters had a full show, I hopped on the train and watched as many episodes as I could before going to school or when on holidays. I even got the toys, the Winx in concert DVDs, and the DS games. In fact, they were the very first DS games I've ever played. Though I suppose that with my name it shouldn't come as a surprise that this show would have been a jam. At least, as far as the first 3 seasons are concerned. Alright, so I won't go into a whole explanation of how Winx Club's tone and target demographic shifted drastically after season 4. Because there are already many people who already did it, such as this video by Genomorph, who probably explained it in a more eloquent way than I could ever hope to do. So if you want a detailed explanation, then go ahead and check this one out. So I didn't like the later seasons, and I've never got to watch season 8 until this year because it never got a French dub, and maybe it was a blessing in disguise. So it's been like, what, 10 years since I've had any interaction with Winx? Whoops, seems my name was enough that I got to see the train wreck that was going on with the new reboot. Winx Club Season 9, the magic is back! Except it's not. It seems that after all these years, Rainbow decided to get a new fresh start by starting all over with a reboot for the show. Which, it's technically the third reboot since Season 5 and 8 were soft reboots, but hey, at least this time it's a proper one so we don't have to question anymore the well continuity issues. This reboot had been the most awaited and controversial thing ever. Twitter timeline flooded with pictures of the reboot design, the transformations, all ridiculed by fans and accused of having been AI generated, storyboard leaked, and so on. It was like watching a sheep being stabbed over and over again on the sacrificial altar. And when it finally came out, oh boy, you could expect floods upon floods of negative reviews on YouTube or clips shared on Twitter. At first, I was considering not saying anything because this wasn't why I made this channel. In the first place, I was only supposed to post one video because I was fed up with negativity from the Fire Emblem fandom. Not to mention that practically every single big Winx creator had made their opinion pieces and that I have a lot of scripts made for actual video analysis that I haven't released. So what exactly could I bring on the table that hasn't been already said regarding everything? The animation has been talked to death, the designs have been mocked to death, the dialogue has been beaten to death.
Fairy of Waves. You'll see my name on the food in the fridge.
What could I possibly had? I don't know, but after watching the first full half of the reboot, I kinda need to talk about it. So, as I've explained, I actually didn't plan on talking about the reboot that much. Part of it because I didn't really care about it, and also because the Winx fandom scares me. But after seeing some leaked storyboard, I thought that despite the ugly visuals, they had potential. So I was hopeful that maybe, the writing would be at least fine. And so, I watched it. Except we weren't even 2 seconds in that I was already starting to take notes, and it ended up being a 44 long pages document. On the bright side, it's potentially the shortest document I have ever written. But I realized I had a lot of things to say about it in the end. Plus, I've been trying my hand at some redesigns for the show since most of the designs are... well... yeah, so I have some time lapses. What we're going to do is that I will say my thoughts on the reboot and also try to present my redesigns and maybe some rewriting ideas. In normal times, I wouldn't try to discuss show elements separately, since I think that failing in one era brings the whole down, but if I don't do that, my script will resemble a disorganized mess. Without further ado, let's dwell on the case of the Winx reboot, Magic is Back! But not really. Firstly, my overall thoughts are that as a whole the reboot is... meh. Really just meh. A lot of its issues are problems that Winx had ever since Season 5, and maybe even Season 4, so it ends up looking like the natural evolution of what the franchise has become for the last few years. More juvenile tone, unappealing visuals, bad animation, and so on. I will say I don't think the reboot is worse than Season 8 or even Season 7 and 6. I'd say it's on par with Season 5. However, I am more generous toward the reboot because some ideas were generally good, just poorly done. And as a result, it ended up having more enjoyable episodes, or at least episodes I can see the demographic enjoying, as opposed to falling asleep while watching. Moreover, since it starts everything all over again, it has a better justification for trying to take liberties with the lore and characters as opposed to the continuity mess that was season 5 onwards, where characters got the age for no reason, and the characters and lore just kept contradicting every past season. So the reboot has at least that over season 5 onwards. That being said, it also has glaring flaws. Probably the biggest flaw of the reboot, since you really can't miss this in an animated show, is the visuals and animation. I will be brief. I don't really like 3D animation. I much prefer 2D animation. So when the reboot chose to be in 3D, I already knew I wasn't going to like the art style. However, putting my bias aside for a second, I don't think the art style is good because it's trying to be a mix of very realistic texture, like seriously, characters literally have pores on their skins, with more cartoony art style, and these two don't mesh well together, so we end up seeing a lot of weird results.
There's darkness within the boy, yet the potential for light.
Not to mention, the textures look outright unappealing, like with Sky's hair looking all greasy. Obviously, puppet animation is a lot more practical and less tiring than frame-by-frame animation. However, let's do a quick comparison between Winx, a show that has started using this around 2012-2013, and a show that started airing around the same time as season 3 and also used puppet animation and flash, Wakfu. Here is Winx.
Incoming! Ugh, not them again. What's up with them? They look different. Whatever. I'll just sweep them up with the rest of the garbage. Good times.
And here is Wakfu.
Man, don't try and trick me, or I'll crush you like a worthless insect. Interesting.
Can you see how much more fluid Wakfu's animation is? Lack of fluidity and a loss of expressivity is basically the biggest issue with the reboot's animation, which is only worsened by the way that the models look, with this mix of cartoony style with very realistic texture that just end up looking weird. I'd say 3D models in general are a lot more stiff and thus it's harder to make them feel very expressive, but the art style really makes these flaws even worse. It's not like there aren't some nice visuals, but they are too few far in between to be worth mentioning. I also won't waste any time analyzing all the animation mistakes in the show because that would be unproductive to list them all, and that animation mistakes a bad show don't make. So let's move on to the part that got everyone to pick up their pencils. The designs. Let's begin with the Winx. Overall, the civilians range from meh to straight up dislike. Again, that's not surprising considering that Winx fashion started to go downhill for a moment, but still. As for the fairy forms, a common complaint is that they shouldn't be so busy because their first transformation was made to be simpler in order to go along with Enchantix being an upgrade, and I'm inclined to agree. But by that point, Winx had tons of flashy detailed transformations, with inferior looking ones being the upgrade, so at this point, I don't mind the outfit being more busy. That being said, I don't think it works in their favor. Aisha's design is literally just her old civilian outfit without the logo and pants. I do miss her wavy hair, but it's the one I like the most. Now, regarding her fairy form, I heard there was some controversy over the fact that she wasn't wearing green because it's her color, while Bloom's color is blue. Okay, I'll be honest, while I prefer green on her, I don't think it's that big of a deal because of the reasons it was done in the OG to begin with. In the original Magic Winx transformation, and yes, I know that now they are called Charmings and that Magic Winx was never the official name, but that's beside the point, Bloom's blue leaned on cyan, which made it very difficult to distinguish it from the shade that Reboot Aisha is wearing. But Reboot Blue has a darker shade of blue, so I think they're distinct enough. Plus, green has been handed to Roxy, and then to Daphne. So, now that being said, her outfit isn't necessarily bad, but I will admit it pales in comparison to her very first transformation. The colors are pretty dull, the repetition between the darker and lighter shade of her main colors are badly spread, so instead of highlighting, it doesn't add any contrast or anything interesting to look at. Meanwhile, Aisha had a darker shade of green in her outfit that popped out, and the cutout in her outfit made it contrast with her skin tone, really bringing it out. Also, her hairstyle in the reboot is derived from an allegedly AI-generated picture. I shouldn't even have to explain why I don't like it. So for my redesign, I decided to go back to the colors she wore during her Season 2 debut. I took inspiration from this outfit by Nyaharu shop and I went back to her wavy hair. For her furry form, I wanted to go back to something similar to her first transformation because it's just perfect. But I didn't want to make it look recycled, so I tried to incorporate some African motifs, taking inspiration from the Aziza, an African genie who is similar to a fairy. Granted, when you see Andros, Aisha doesn't really look like she's from an African-inspired setting, but her name is very popular in Africa, so I wanted to tie back to that root. I tried to draw her wings and part of her outfit to mimic a waterfall and call back to her aquatic powers. In the final version, I tried incorporating some more motifs, but we'll get there, don't worry. I feel nothing for this design, I just think it's a pity Musa can't wear red anymore in a civilian form. I also think it makes her kinda look older than she's supposed to be. It looks a bit dated. Her pigtails look soft, which is another issue with the art style for the reboot being a mix of realistic texture with more cartoony looking characters. In the OG, since it was 2D, they could kinda get away with not making her hair too detailed, but here, it doesn't look too good. Regarding her fairy form, I hate her boots. They don't make sense. Why are there straps all over it? It doesn't make any sense. You can't have both straps and lace. It's too much. I also think her red is too light and too close to pink to contrast well with her purple as opposed to her previous fairy form in Magic Winx. Her wing pattern is cool, but her hairstyle change is a bit unnecessary. I think I'm not a fan of Musa with braids, is all. Also, I'd rather have her wear her headphones in her transform form than a civilian. It was a perfect opportunity to get crazy with it! Regarding my take on Musa, I gave her bangs inspired by Asian bob hairstyles, such as Imekat. I took inspiration from this outfit by Nyaharu shop and mixed it with some elements of her fairy form regarding the silhouette. I chose red, white and black since these colors are very often mixed, especially in Asian cultures, and I added some details such as a lotus flower and the Chinese character for music. I originally wrote on Gaku, but after thinking about it, Musa's Asian influence had always seemed closer to Chinese rather than Japanese, so I changed these in the final result. As for her fairy form, I designed her dress more like a kipao and wanted to incorporate her iconic magenta. I added some purples and yellow for contrast, took inspiration from her reboot wings, since I did like the idea of her wing shape, to make them look like piano keys, and designed her headphones with a butterfly wing, such as the one popularized by Magnet. Spoilers ahead, but she might be the fairy form I like drawing the most. I don't really like her new hairstyle, and while I like the shape of her civilian form, I don't really like the colors. That's all I can say, honestly. As for her fairy form, I really don't like it. The purple is so violently close to blue, it burns my eyes whenever I look at it. Outside of her headpiece and wings, nothing about this feat screams Tech Fairy at all. On one hand I get it because Tech Fairy is hard to design. But say whatever you want about her whole outfit, it did convey the idea of a futuristic fairy, especially with her unique wings. It also had better contrast and a softer, agreeable to look at shade of purple. My take on her was also fairly easy. I went back to her pixie cut and made her bangs sharper. I gave her wings back and took inspiration from Season 2 to Free's color palette since I liked it a lot. I tried to mimic her reboot clothing silhouette since I did like that. As for her fairy form, I will admit at first I was intimidated by the idea of designing a tech fairy because of how to do that. But then, I got an idea. I knew one show that had a futuristic take on Magical Girl that could help me. Yep, I took huge inspiration from the Synfogil's design, most specifically Shirabe's design. So as a result, I ended up making a robot fairy. I admit I was worried it would clash with the spirit of the show, but then I remembered I'm just doing this for fun to appeal to what I like, and I like weird stuff, so that was the perfect occasion to bring a softer color palette back, and it works so nicely with green. I decided to pay homage to her magic Winx wings, and so she has electric wings whose shape she can change depending on her needs. It looks sketchy here, but in the final version, I promise it will look more organic. My second favorite civilian form. I like her color palette, her dress looks cute, but her jacket is over-detailed, her belt gets in the way, her boots are not matching, and give her iconic blue bags, please. Now regarding her fairy form, I will admit that I think her having this braid makes sense, and I like her having some flowers on the hair. My praise isn't there. While her outfit doesn't look too bad, like for Aisha and Yusa, it lacks contrast. Just like for Aisha, the repetitions between shades of pinks are badly done and don't bring out the lighter shade of pink. In her OG outfit, the top of her dress had two darker shades of pink, framing a lighter one in the center, really bringing it out and standing out with her lighter colored skirt. Her skirt's layers are too much, and the spreading between darker or stronger shades of pink with lighter and more faded shades of pinks feels so random. It feels like they were trying to layer it like a rose, but it doesn't work. Finally, the choker is a bit over-detailed, and give her a green wings back. It was contrasting stronger with her pink than the few greens details on the reboot. So for my take on Flora, I gave her a loops back and I made her a lighter jacket, a looser dress, and gave her sandals to resemble more the spirit of her season 1 fit, even if this one isn't my favorite. As for her fairy form, I tried to do what I think the reboot tried to do by making her skirt resemble a rose, so I layered it like petals. In the end, I ended up changing her gloves to ribbon looking like Ivy and altered her wings. Much like Aisha, a civilian form is just a retouch of her OG civilian form. That being said, I don't like it. I miss her bangs. I think the white shirt is out of place, especially since it doesn't go all the way down to her skirt. I found the boots out there and give her headband back, please. I don't necessarily mind her hairstyle swap though. Regarding the transformation, the orange she wears is too oversaturated. It feels almost fluorescent. And the lack of blue is a huge downside because the blue color serves as a way to contrast with the orange and soften her color palette, a connection to the moon, and also to her mom since her mom is most associated to the moon, while her dad is to the sun. I don't like the weird ribbons in her hair and the star pattern on her foot is too much. Now, so for a civilian form, a season 1 fit is essentially perfection. So I just added stuff I thought would work. Firstly, sandals. I added a choker because I did like that and a dress. It felt a bit plain, but I added some details in the final version. As for her transformation, I did the same thing as for Aisha, trying to rework around her original, so I tried mixing some concept with her magic bloom counterpart and added some more accessories. I also tried to redesign a Septette since the new version looked, well, less like a scepter and more like a wand. So I added references to the sun, moon, and zodiac. It's probably too on the nose about her elements, but I don't necessarily mind it. Given how many shapes Bloom has in 13 episodes alone, let's start with a normal civilian form. It's Offense or clear reference to season 1, but the dragon pattern on it is too much. I don't like the mesh she wears under her vest, and of course, they had to show home that ugly shade of pink. Ever since season 3 to 4, Rainbow realized that Bloom could rock blue and pink, so every chance they get, they force her to wear pink with her blue. But the issue is that the shade of pink is a purplish, oversaturated fluorescent fuchsia. Why? In the OG, she was allowed to wear other colors like teal, green, yellow, but now it's always pink, and I'm tired of it. They could at least give her a softer pink. It would work so much better. I think the only time I thought it worked well was with her first concert costume, and it's because it wasn't just blue, it also had darker shades that made it less violent to look at. But ever since season 5, yeah. Dark Bloom's civilian form is pretty cool, although I don't like her tights. Mainly because they're mixing both types of tights and it feels too much. Also, a purple belt can go and there was no need for the blue hair dye. I feel it brings the design down a bit. So, for her fairy form, firstly, the ugly pink strikes again. Secondly, I know they took inspiration from K-pop outfits to design the Winx form, but Bloom's asymmetrical sleeve or whatever that is doesn't sit right with me. It feels too much. The shades of blue are mismatching and her hair is a mess. There are too many braids flying everywhere without coordination and the pearl in her hair makes it worse. Compare that to the simplicity of her color palette in season 1, cyan blue leaning on teal with yellow. It's refreshing and pleasant to look at. As for Dark Bloom, take the issues I had with regular Bloom and multiply by 1000. Dark Bloom had always been a simple recolor of Bloom in black. However, here's the thing. Since OG Bloom's design was simple, the color palette swap wasn't that huge of a deal. But in the reboot, because there are so many details and colors, it ends up looking weird. Not to mention that weird blue dye and her hair. I'm sorry, but it's literally night and day. Finally, Bloom's new transformation. Yes, she got an upgrade early on. We will talk about this later. I will say that I like the idea of the golden thing going on with the gloves. My praise isn't there. We are still stuck with the ugly ponytail braid. There are more colors going on, but the gold is too much on her skirt. The white thing feels out of place and her boots? Tights? I don't know, I think they look off with a mismatch of colors. That being said, I like the silhouette of the outfit a lot better than her first one. So, what's my take on Bloom? I did notice that the reboot added a subtle hint of orange in her eyes, but it was hidden by her iris. So I took inspiration to give her a yellow iris, contrasting strongly with her blue eyes. So I went back to her yellow because this would go back to give her all primary colors, you know? Primary colors being the colors of heroic characters. At first I wanted to go for a blue shirt, but the final result made her look a bit too soft, and I wanted to go back to Bloom's more fiery nature, so I ended up altering it in the end. As for her fairy form, I did struggle to find ideas, but I came upon this video by Enchanterium, and this gave me ideas. I wanted to do something similar to the fire-like plate on her chest, but also on her gloves, wings, and boots. I also added the idea of dragon scales and a heart-shaped jewel on the center of her chest. I also wanted her hair to have yellow hues, like in the movies. In the end, I thought the design was a bit clumsy, so I tried reworking it in the final result.
Leave it to the specialists.
The specialists are gonna be here? When?
The specialist new design were all over my Twitter, and I still remember the first time I saw it. I was laughing so much that I knew if I ever had a bad day, I used to look at it again to heal myself by laughing. I don't want to sound mean, but these really don't look good. And perhaps the embody better than any more less what I mean by the completing attempt at realism while pursuing cartoony art style. Timmy has a weirdly over-defined feature. His lips are too pompous and too far from his nose. He also misses some eyelashes and his nose is a bit too reddish. Sky's hair doesn't match his face and it feels too fluffy compared to the original counterpart's simpler hairstyle, and the texture looks weird. When it's side profile, it looks usually fine, but whenever you see his face, it's like looking at the fifth dimension. I think that if he had been drawn 2D, it would not look that weird, honestly. As for Brandon... Brandon had to pretend to be his best friend and ended up being captured by ninjas in his stead several times when they were kids. Gets scolded for his best friend fighting with some other guy during an important event. Almost ended up being forcefully married to an underground princess. Got thrown into jail by his best friend for trying to help him when he was brainwashed. Got tied down by a spoiled rich girl, leading to endless cheating allegations. Got character assassinated in later seasons. Had a recurring joke where the bird version of his girlfriend fawned over him. Got a voice and design that don't match. And now... this. I think he might win the award of unluckiest character I've ever encountered in fiction. I don't know what to say exactly, but his lips are weirdly glowy, and he looks too old. Also, his hair is weird. Also, his face is very inconsistent across animations. Riven is the only one I don't take any issues with, even if his hair still looks like a bit. I don't like the new uniform at all. I think it leans too much into the sci-fi and doesn't have any fantasy aspect to it in order to counterbalance it. I also don't like the badge. For the civilian forms, Team is fun. I will admit that I like Brandon's civilian outfit, but it has issues. I mainly like the silhouette and the color. Green looks good on him. Riven is fun, but I do wish it had more colors. Now, for Sky.
Oh boy, my favorite seat. Excuse me, do you mind?
He wins the contest of worst civilian form because what is this? He wears 2 jackets and one white jacket has blue and pink flames on it? I see the vision. They wanted to reference Bloom, but they did it in the worst way possible. They should have stopped at them sharing the color blue. Really. So, how did I design them? Well, I have a confession. I am not really good at drawing men, but I also suck at drawing in general, so yeah. More seriously, I was looking for advice on how to make them look fashionable, but not too eye-catching, so I asked for help from a friend, and his answer was... well... But just as I started to lose hope, I remembered about a show that featured cool men outfits, fashionable yet simple, that fitted very well with the idea of the male cast being young-looking but also athletic. Yep, I used Senseiya as a reference because, I mean, look at this. Simple, but it works. The first of the team I designed was Riven. I originally gave him more of a crop top with a blue palette to evoke his season 2 to 3 main outfit, but my friend told me he looked... let's just say it's how I discovered that he hated Riven. So I changed the final result by going with a more punk look and introduced more crimson to balance things out. Then for Timmy, I took inspiration from some elements of his Magic Bloom design. I gave him longer sleeves and a little bag to carry his inventions. For Brandon, I tried to stay close to his reboot look, but I got rid of the elements I disliked, so I gave him a simpler jacket and changed his shirt. As for Sky, he was the one I had to work a lot more for. Firstly, I tried to go back to his simpler hairstyle, but I wanted his bangs to be a bit more unruly, so I took inspiration from Edward from Full Brother Alchemist and Link from The Legend of Zelda. This resulted in Sky gaining a light hair piercing. I based the coloring for his hair with the lighter bangs on the first movie because it looked good, and it's also the only time Sky looked good in 3D. Poor dude. As for this palette, I went back to yellow and blue, like in season 4, because I admit that the reboot trying to make him and Bloom match is cute, but the result... isn't, so simplicity wins. They share a full color palette. Also, not me realizing that now Bloom's color palette matches his hair and eyes. As for the uniform, I was racking my brain to come up with something because the original was so simple yet effective. But then, I got an idea. A crazy idea. The specialists are Magic Knights, right? Yes, I did reference Magic Knight Ravener to design the specialist's new uniform. You heard that right. More specifically, Umi. And I will admit that the end results would never let anyone come to that conclusion. But I went back to their original palette, used the layered shoulder plate, and to have a little sci-fi, incorporated each specialist colors into the armor. Also, Timmy's glasses are different and Sky ties his hair now. I am including Robin since she is Faragonda's assistant. Same thing as for the guys regarding the uniform. I don't have much to say about her civilian form, except that her pants being too baggy gives her a bit of a weird silhouette, and the texture of her shirt looks cheap. Faragonda lost a lot of her whimsy even if her outfit is impeccable. I do miss her whole color palette. Griffin's new design sounds cool, I will admit. Whiskey's lost all his whimsy. He looks like a generic AI-generated leprechaun. Palladium has the same design for the most part, but the braids bringing down, not to mention its facial features, looks wrong. Saladin looks identical to Season 1. Kodatota looks fine. I didn't redesign them because I am a human being. I had been working on these for a full week. But I did try to give Robin a new look, so I gave her a slight tan because I figured it would suit her, a purple top with tartan motif, a choker, and I thought she'd look stylish if she had a jacket tied around her.
Will we break the rules again?
Again and again and again.
Literally the only irrevocably good designs in this reboot. I do miss Tommy and Darcy's old civilian forms, but their new forms are still good. The same applies to their witch form. It feels like a reskin version of their old witch form, but here, the details aren't overbearing. Since I do like them, no tricks for design, right? Well, normally yes, as I only intended to do the Winx. But I went on a redesign spree, and so I did some more for the tricks, then the other antagonist, and then the specialist. So for High C, when I was scrolling to find ideas, I saw that a lot of redesigns gave her a jacket, and I liked the idea, so I gave her a jacket too. Some accessories on her skirt, and since I liked a snowflake lace in the reboot, I gave her snowflakes lace tied. For Darcy, I took inspiration from her reboot silhouette, but I tied her sleeves together since I found the holes to be random. I originally was going to go for a snake motif, since it's been most commonly associated with hypnosis, but I ended up going for spiders to evoke how her powers are like a spider web, making you bow to her will. As for Stormy, I went for a more punk look, so I went back to her original palette with a lot more red, pinks, and burgundy, with a tartan motif and spiky color. She also has a thunder motif on her tights. I gave her freckles because I noticed she had these in the reboot, and more sharp teeth to reflect her hard-headed personality. I hope this doesn't sound too stuffy. I also gave them all belts with their initials on it. As for the witch's form, I tried referencing Magic Bloom's elements, so High Sea's cape has cuts that evokes the shape of eyes and snowflakes. For Darcy, I didn't go too far from original, but I added a stellene stone on her choker since it can be used for hypnosis. Her hats with skirts are made to look like a spider web. For Stormy, I kept the punk motif and designed her cuts to resemble torn clouds.
I'm Diaspro.
I think enough people made fun of it. I don't need to add anything. Again, that's one of these designs that would look fine if the show had stayed in a cartoony style instead of trying realistic textures. Also, it's way too white. Bring back her red, please. Her fairy form isn't any better, but we hardly see it, so I'm going to move on to my home take. So for Diaspro, I gave her dress back, a choker, a more aristocratic Lolita look, incorporating more magentas and a jasper in her headband and on her ribbon. Her fairy form looks really close to her original form. I gave her sandals on it with a gem, and I tried to incorporate more of it in her design, making her skirt more fluffy and round to go back to her civilian form, and added gems on her wings.
You too, Damien. You're old enough for regular classes.
His concept design is the most suspected of being AI generated. This should be enough to say what I think about him. I'll be honest, the first time I saw him, I thought he looked like Hayato Sakamaki from Diabolic Lovers. The birds are nonsensical and they look too thin. The shoulder plates also look weird and they don't have any wave to them. Also the lipstick thing. I also included Damien in the list of characters redesigns because why not? I thought of giving him a turtleneck shirt with a large collar, gloves, and I tried to reuse the belt motif but differently.
Oh boy, my favorite seat. Excuse me, do you mind?
Ew. Now then.
I won't take gloves. A child form is a horror factory, and a ghost form looks like it's made of cheese. It's not a hot take, but I will say it. Movie Daphne looks so much better than that. So I took inspo from the movie Daphne for my redesign. I really can't recall if these things were wings or pigtails, so I went the wing way and tried to play around her dress. I think it looks better in ghost form, while in the human form colors are a bit too mismatched. But hey, that happens to even the best of us. Also, I didn't forget about her. Don't worry, I did make a dark bloom redesign. Instead of giving her dark makeup, I simply gave her a dark deep rouge. I originally was going to give her a different outfit, but I thought it looked too plain. So I took inspo from Ushino Utau's dress to design a civilian form, and she is, so far, the favorite civilian form I designed. As for her fairy form, I chose to break the heart gem to represent her becoming evil. Something the reboot did that I can't understand was use all this blue for her and give her dark red flames. Why? So I did what the reboot didn't do and went with the idea of her using blue flames to contrast with Bloom's yellow. I also got inspired by Alpine Squib's take on her when they mentioned wanting to convey Darker's control over her, so I added a skeleton motif to represent the grasp that Darker has on her and a glowing light to evoke his eyes in the final results. So here you go, now you know my inspo and concept, so you can watch my time-lapses while I talk about the show's character writing. But before we get there, I need to talk about the transformations, the music, and the writing issues. The main appeal of the Magical Girl show is of course the transformations. I think this video explains rather well the problems with Winx transformation, but it's my review so I can't just tell you to watch the video even if you should. I also have to give my reasons as for why I don't think they hold up and why I agree with this video in the first place. Overall thoughts are that the transformation suffers from being overstepped, too much going on and not having a proper focus, too many ideas mixed in one sequence. For example, in Aisha's transformation, she gets her outfit in the same time that she gets her hair, but the camera does a poor job at highlighting that. The golden rule in Magical Girl shows is that when the details get added, there needs to be some emphasis on it, so if the hair transforms, there should be a focus on that. But we pass that to focus on her getting her outfit when it's too easy to miss. In her Enchanting's form, her hair transforms, so we focus on her hair and then we move on to her getting her outfit. They could have easily made that moment where she comes out of the water and does a Hailey Bailey reference be the moment where her hair transforms, but they didn't. So she basically is half done with her transformation, but they made the process of her getting her wings even longer for no reason. That makes her transformation come across as tedious. And this problem of being practically done with the transformation but the wings take forever to get is recurring with the others one as well, like Musa's dancing no longer contributing to her transformation, but being an additional step before she can get her wings. Tekna does a lot of useless spinning, and Stella's pulling magic tricks to change the background from day to night to day again. Speaking of, we have the background distracting us from the transformation. Such is the case with Musa. The background keeps changing colors and it distracts from Musa instead of letting her be the center of attention. It doesn't help that the camera passes very fast the transform pod over clothing so we can barely see it. Most of these transformations revolves around the wings performing only one action to fully get transformed. Flora, for instance, simply dandles on vines to get her dress, shoes, and even hair. There is no sense of movement here. By movement, I mean that when an element is introduced like flowers or light, it should wrap around the specific part it's meant to transform. For example, in her Enchantix form, the roses petals that colors Flora's lips form around her hands to create her gloves. Likewise, when Aisha transforms in her Enchantix form, Morphix wraps around her arms and her body to form her outfit. Musa grabs music strings and rounds it around her body to get her main outfit. It's not one action equal one transformation done save for the wings. And it feels less like the wings are doing this as they transform and more that they transform while they are doing this. Let me explain. In a transformation for the reboot, Bloom does a giant heart trail and all the while she uses her fire to get her globe, grabs it and uses it to get her outfit and hair done. Once she's done with her heart trail, they turn into butterflies and then she gets her wings. The focus isn't Bloom's transforming, it's her making the big heart trail. As opposed to OG Bloom who made a quick heart after she's done transforming before she poses, it inverses priorities here. That is the same issue with Musa's dancing not contributing to her transformation, or Flora's dandling on vines, or Aisha surfing. And again, it's done very fast for the part we care about, the transformation, and instead we focus on these magical tricks. We aren't given the time to appreciate the moment, this one unique moment meant to represent this sacred mythical act of going from a regular girl to a woman. After all, a lot of old school magical girls show featured young girls turning into beautiful young women precisely to reflect the coming of age aspect of Mahou shoujo stories. But even when it's a sailor warrior, a dancing princess, or in this case a fairy, this dimension remains. It's like looking at a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, a duckling turning into a swan. It's something unique. You can't just rush it by making them get their clothes with one action, with the camera hardly focusing on anything, and then make them do useless stuff in between to get their wings. Especially when all the girls are making these big smiles. It looks like they are the only ones having fun and the audience isn't allowed to share it. But the worst of all has to be Dark Bloom because it's literally just recycled. I get that the design is just Darker Bloom, but she's supposed to be evil, so why is she still doing her heart trail and looking in marvel at the butterflies that will form her wings? They didn't even need to make one for her because in the original show, she doesn't have one, so I don't think it was necessary. As for Bloom's upgrade transformation, it's too lacking for me to mention it.
Musa, fairy of music. Love that beat.
So keep one thing in mind, I am not a music expert, so I am mostly describing my feelings based on impressions and affects. I won't focus on the BGM because I think it's mostly okay, and I will admit that Winx music didn't necessarily do much for me ever since the 3 previous seasons. But I will say that I am not the biggest fan of the opening's recover. It feels a bit hollow and it probably has to do with the choice to make it sound more pop techno and the vocals sounding dry and too sharp. The OG's instrumentals feels less synthetic and simpler, and I guess they wanted something more modern, but I'm not convinced. I think this instrumentalization is very overdone in the reboot. Likewise, the transformation songs feel very generic because of the overuse of this style of music for every song in the reboot, and the vocals have the same issues of feeling synthetic, but the biggest issue is that it doesn't feel like it matches the sequence or that it's made to be a transformation song. That's an issue I think applies to a lot of the Winx transformation songs for a moment, honestly, especially compared to Magic Winx. I won't go too deep into the details, but basically, Magic Winx had its own reactions to the girl's transformation, which reinforced the notion of theming and contributed to the characterization of each girl, making them stand out in their own way. Now, this seems to be unique to the original transformation since this doesn't carry off to Enchantrix, but if you combine the music not standing out with the rather static transformation, where there is a lack of movement, or rather a movement that isn't involved in the transformation but in the girls doing things, this makes Forever Winx feel out of place. Alright, so we reached the story section. I have a lot to say, but I will say that the overall story is, I really can't phrase it better. The issue with the story is that most of the plot for the episodes and overall seems more or less fine, but it has issues that are amplified by an overall bad presentation. For example, in episode 3, we have the Trix sending Nut to steal Stella's ring, and the girls have to get it back. The plot idea is fine, and overall the episode isn't too bad, but its issues lie with how it misuses elements from the original and the dialogue. So while this would sound entertaining for a new Winx fan that is in the age demographic, long-time Winx fans are able to realize that these elements are misused. Okay, so instead of doing something that I hate, and that is to say, to quote every instances of lack of consistency or plot holes, because I think it's counterproductive, what we're going to do is that I will mention the writing issues, mainly focusing on the most jarring example of this flaw in the reboot, and discuss overall story flaws when I tackle the characters. The biggest flaw that the reboot has is that the pacing is on the floor. It is the biggest issue. You can notice it in the very first episodes. Now, it has to be said that pacing had always been an issue with Winx due to the format of the show, being that not only do you need to watch every episode in a chronological order instead of hopping on it at any point, but it meant that each episode's main conflict had to be more or less resolved in one episode. So, for example, while the main plot of trying to steal Stella's ring went on for several episodes, taking up the first half of the show before it's solved, and that we can transition to Bloom searching of her origins, to relaunch this plot point, a conflict was introduced in every episode and solved in these very episodes. Episode 1 is the meeting between Bloom and Stella, ending with them defeating Nut and Bloom going to Althea. In episode 2, it's Bloom entering Althea, meeting with the girls, the first confrontation between them and the Trix, and the formation of the club. Episode 3 is the party with Bloom's first transformation, and so on. There is time to establish things, which is why Winx came across more as a slow burn and slice of life show before the stakes grew more intense during the climax of season 1. The reboot on the other hand... Okay, so episode 1 of season 1 is around 20 minutes, while the reboot is closer to being around 26 minutes long. Yet, the reboot rushes everything. Instead of entering Althea in episode 2, Bloom enters Althea in 4 minutes. 4 minutes. That is the time that in the original episode it took her to go to the park and meet Stella. It is insane. Not to mention the way Bloom meets Stella and Flora. It's literally her taking her bike, and the moment she arrives, she stops, she puts it near a bench, and she finds 2 fairies and a version of Nut that lost all his whimsy fighting in the daylight. And only she notices that somehow. That isn't a good start at all. Likewise, she gets picked up by Stella and Flora 3 minutes in and is forcefully dragged in Althea. But we don't see any of that, then we go back to Bloom having told her parents she will go to special boarding school. I'll get into the problems of all this later on, trust me, but just keep in mind, it happens in 4 minutes. 5 minutes later, she is at Althea, and we speedrun the introduction of other characters such as the Trix, the other Winx members, and even Faragonda. Bloom isn't literally 1 minute in the room, meeting the rest of the club that Robin knocks at the door to tell her, Flora and Stella, that Faragonda wants to meet them in her office. Then we move on to Flora and Stella being punished, the Trix framing Bloom for material degradation, and then we meet Damien. It takes 12 minutes into the episode for the pacing to slow down in 1 episode, That is a bad start. It feels like they mixed what could be 4 distinct episodes into one just so they can speedrun Bloom entering Althea and get to the juicy stuff. And that's just on an episode-to-episode basis, but before I move on to the building up of main key plot points that carry out in the overarching story, such as Bloom's real identity or Damien's real identity, we'll have to discuss the bad presentation. So here I am referring to the way the characters and animation are used to convey the story and how the actions of the characters create a confused timeline. Let's begin with episode 1. I am pretty sure everyone mentioned it, but when Bloom gets her bike, it seems to be the evening. Yet between this moment and her being dragged into the portal, night had time to fall. Even though her seeing the fairies get attacked by Nut was immediate. The passage of time is not well conveyed at all. Not to mention, we transition to what's seemingly tomorrow before Bloom leaves, so what happened in between? Then of course, we have the transition to Althea, with Bloom arriving, and for some reasons, Flora and Stella aren't with her. Instead, they are chatting away and waving at her like they were waiting for her. But the confused timeline gets even worse in episode 2. So in episode 2, it's revealed that Faragunda and Griffith are organizing a test in order to determine who is a fairy and who is a witch. That isn't a bad idea, however, it's stated that this ceremony is made to welcome new students, and later on, Bloom goes on what's seemingly her first class since she can't find a seat and Whiskys doesn't even recognize her. However, in episode 1, Sky said, and I quote,
"You've been here 3 days and you already set off what could turn into a huge disaster? I'm impressed."
I am sure that you have already seen people complain about that line, but if you take it at face value, then you have to wonder why exactly is Bloom behaving like it's her first day since she's supposed to have been there for 3 days. I don't think it was the intent. I think someone made a mistake when writing Sky's line, and it's probably not worth thinking about it too much, but it's definitely creating a lot of confusion. And it only gets worse from here, because after the class with Whiskys doesn't go too well, Bloom crosses paths with the Trinks and then returns to her room, and we see her and the girl unpacking their stuff. Wait, what? But in episode 1, they were already all installed! You could make the argument that it's because they are starting a new year and that Bloom arrived right before the new year, but not only is this not well communicated because of the unfolding of episode 1, but also in that case, shouldn't we see the Winx pack up their things to move on to another room? And even if you try to excuse this, are we supposed to believe that they had classes before they unpacked in their room? Shouldn't it be the reverse? That's what I mean by bad presentation that doesn't communicate well what's happening to the audience, because if we compare to season 1, the point was that Stella was returning to her previous room from last year, and that when she and Bloom arrived, Flora, Tekna, and Musa had also just arrived, with Flora explicitly telling us she had just arrived and apologizing for letting her things be in a mess. We even see Tekna and Musa with their luggage, suggesting that they have just arrived. And since it took 1 episode for Bloom to go to Althea with Stella explicitly telling us that she was on her way to Althea because it's a new year at school, while Bloom is stated to be on holidays at the very beginning of the episode, we have enough information to understand what's going on and to find it believable that the fairies would have just arrived. But the reboot's desire to rush things out plays against it since it's not communicated that Bloom is on holidays, and episode 2 shows her going back to her whole school, contradicting that notion. But because we meet, albeit briefly, the other Winx members already in the room doing their little things to introduce their personality and interest right away, we are also indirectly communicated that the Winx had already unpacked their things and settled in the room. But that's immediately contradicted by episode 2 presenting them having a conflict over sharing the same room and arguing about not having enough space, which would communicate that they didn't unpack yet. And if you think it's over, no. Because episode 1 ends with Bloom and the girls taking care of the pink alpacas, and then we transition to the tricks before the credits roll. The environment suggests it was still day, and then in the next episode they are in Faragonda's office. So now I'm wondering if this takes place in the same day as episode 1, which would honestly seem convoluted, but also the environmental light in episode 2 seems to suggest that they were being summoned in Fargonda's office, and that the first class all happens in the morning, while her meeting Sky and then the tricks seems to happen in the afternoon. So the reboot doesn't do a good job at telling us what's happening in regards to time due to its presentation issues. But what makes this worse is that it's seemingly an issue only in the first 2 episodes, because in episode 3, you don't have that issue, and this seems to be the case so far. Yet the first 2 episodes, the one meant to establish a rhythm, are the most chaotic ones. I'm not mentioning all this to seem nitpicky, but the notion of time in the reboot is pretty essential considering what they do with an important plot point carried out from season 1. And that's how I do a smooth transition between this part and the next. That is probably the biggest complaint made by original fans, but the reboot doesn't seem to handle the original plot points of the Winx series very well. Note here, I am not talking about the reboot's decision to depart or deviate from the original. No, I am referring to specific instances where the reboot reuses elements from the original, but doesn't do it well at all. So stuff like the decision to remove Kiko or replacing Elia by Damien won't be covered. Rather, I'll talk about the way they carry moments and plot beats that happen in the original in regards to the overall plot. Such an example would be the Ring of Solaria. Allow me to explain. In season 1, the Trick sends Nut to capture Stella and steal the Ring of Solaria as they believe it has the Dragon Flame. That is because the ring was forged from the Dragon Flame, although it doesn't possess it. And because of this, when Stella is on her way to Althea school, she is attacked and falls on her. After Bloom helps her, the two become friends and they eventually defeat Nut and his troll by the end of the episode, before Bloom goes to Althea. Because Nut failed and that the Trick still believes that the ring has the flame in it, they continue to target Stella specifically, trying various schemes to steal the ring until we reach episode 5, where they kidnap Stella in hope to steal the ring, only to realize she doesn't have it. So instead, they bargain with the Winx, Stella in exchange for the ring. Once they obtain the ring, they come to the disappointing realization that the flame isn't in it and immediately give up on it. In episode 6, the girls go to Cloud Tower to get it back. In the next episode, the Tricks are still looking for the Dragon Flame, having realized it wasn't in the ring, but still sensing it. And, as we progress, we realize that it was within Bloom. Of course, all of this had been built up with Bloom's powers manifesting out of a sudden one day, or the fact that she always had a strange interest for fairies. Foreshadowing! But Bloom wasn't the Trick's main objective until late in the story. There was a process of discovering things. The reboot, however, doesn't do this well at all. So I know people are mad at the reboot for the Tricks working for a man yet again, but honestly, that's the least of my concern. Although I wish he either looked cool like Darko or was entertaining to watch like Balto, but that aside, my real issue with it is that the Tricks know from the get-go that Bloom has the Dragon Flame, because the reboot does that, yet it still tries to have them steal the ring. In the original, Nat was working for the Tricks and the reboot still does that, but the difference is that by the end of episode 1, we already knew that. In the reboot it took us until episode 3 to realize this. Since episode 1 moved on so quickly from the fight with Nut, the focus completely shifted. I will not mention the obvious problem with the fact that we are never told or shown how the fight ended or how Nut returned to Althea since we move on so quickly, specifically because, well, it's obvious. But this also means that we can't understand why he was there in the first place. The Trick sending the pink alpacas in berserk forms through a portal on Earth implies that's how we got there, but the thing is, why? They send the alpacas to cause trouble for Bloom in hope to make her go back to Earth, but with Nut? What was the goal? Well, according to Flora, the monster was probably after Stella's ring. Okay, what? Why? Well, that's the thing. Now that the Tricks know the real source of the Dragon Flame, they have no reason to send Nut to steal it. You could argue it's just Flora guessing, but if that's the case, then we still don't know how he ended up here. Episode 3 tries to revisit episode 6 of the original season, and what I think in regards to the plot and the overall conflict within the episode, it's fine, especially after the rough beginning. The ring being reduced to this amplification of power turns it into a one-time thing. I will be honest, I don't like the idea of taking such a major plot point that was meant to lead into a transition from a more slice of life and slow burn pacing until we get to the heart of Bloom's Tornado and to the overarching climax and turning it into a one-time thing, but I was ready to let it slide since the reboot wanted the big bad to already know who Bloom was, but the problem is that again, if it weren't for episode 1, I wouldn't complain. But this brings up another issue regarding the tricks, and it's their initial motivation to target Bloom. The way it's portrayed is very weird. For some reason, Icy senses something in Bloom and wants to get rid of her, with her two sisters telling her she's been dramatic for no reason. And yeah, it comes across that way because she really has no reason at the moment. We don't even know yet that she met Vexius when it could have been the perfect occasion to have that in. Like, instead of just insisting that she must be trouble because she senses it, having her say, no, she isn't a regular fire fairy, I sense something deeper, she must be the girl her new friend is looking for or something. Because if not, we are forced to ask ourselves when exactly did the tricks meet Vexius and in which circumstances. Something the reboot is happy not to dwell on, even though in every season, even the latest bad season, we always see how the tricks meet with their new bosses. The reboot has two options. Either imply that the tricks are already in contact with Vexius and explain later on how that happened, or have them meet in episode 2 since in episode 1 they'd already met with Bloom. But we got neither. So as a result, it feels weird that Icy is mentioning their new friend in episode 2, when in episode 1 she just wanted Bloom to be fired. Now maybe you'll have noticed, but most of these problems are only related to early episodes, and that's because these are the weakest of the bunch, which makes a poor impression on the rest. But I will admit that the following episodes are not nearly as bad, even if some issues remain. And I think the end of the reboot goes downhill, but again, I'm not trying to dig a hole at everything because I don't want this video to be too long, but now, let's focus on another problem, the lore. Alright, so many people have pointed out that the reboot doesn't always go into details to explain things or concepts it introduces. In all fairness, these were already explained in the original. However, for newcomers to the series, this isn't really helpful now, is it? For example, the Trix wants to open the door to the Omega Dimension to create themselves an army to take over the magical dimension, but they don't explain what that is. Even though it's the subject of one of the classes. I guess we can deduce that the Trix talking about raising an army implies that the Omega Dimension is a place where they can find soldiers, but I don't think a newcomer is going to be as familiar with the place as someone who watched Season 3. Likewise, the ancestral witches are mentioned, but because the focus is on Vexius, they are barely talked about, whereas in the original we know that the Trix wanted to fulfill what they failed to achieve as their descendants. So they were directly linked to the Trix motivation. But with Vexius it's unclear, maybe it'd be revealed eventually, but so far it's hard to see how it ties into all of this. And then there is the law that was changed. I mean, with Bloom it was a given considering her backstory gets retconned every season. Except season 8, where instead it's Icy that got a new brand backstory. But the biggest change they made was new King Cloud Tower extra scenes, so the witches go to Althea too. How exactly Cloud Tower ended up being destroyed in the first place hasn't been explained properly yet, but I think that what they were trying to do was give more justification for Bloom thinking she was a witch? I'm not sure. Anyway, here is the thing. Because of this, the reboot's not explaining the difference between fairies and witches is more of a handicap. In the original it was never properly explained, but it didn't bother me because Winx was very obviously playing with the whole fairy tale trope and folklore, where the only distinction between fairies and witches was one was good and the other evil. Obviously, for people who like harder world building and wants this to be revisited, it would be a minus for Winx to not do this. But the reason why I think it works against the reboot is that now they are bringing to our attention the fact that witches and fairies are seemingly similar enough to be mistaken unless you do a test to recognize them, and thus bringing up the question of what exactly makes them different. As opposed to the OG that just runs with it thinking, well, it's fairy tales, that's how it is, the reboot is directly pointing to the differences and not answering the question it asks. It's basically the equivalent of reading a fairy tale and its retelling. There was no need to explain why Fairy Godmother only showed up after Cinderella was told she can't go to the ball, at least for versions that have a Fairy Godmother. Because we are in the logic of fairy tale where Wondrous is considered to be a natural, accepted part of the world. But if a retelling as Cinderella asks her Fairy Godmother why she didn't show up sooner, and that the retelling never answers that, and do not treat it as a comedic thing but a serious moment, then it's bringing it on itself to answer that question, and if it doesn't do it, people will be disappointed. So for those who wanted an answer from the original and didn't got one, the reboot had the opportunity to do something right, but instead, what we got was a very wishy-washy portrayal of the witches. They are portrayed as troublemakers, but the one we focus on the most are the tricks, who almost seems like the only witches to be in class with the other fairies because of how much we focus on them. So when the reboot presents us a flora that says that not all fairies are perfect or witches evil, we don't have much argument in favor of witches. It's always been a bit of a complicated subject, with Myrta, the good witch, turning into a fairy, her friend Lucy kind of fading out of the picture in later seasons, and not having a major witch character ever since Selena. Even Griffith, who was portrayed as a longtime friend and rival of Faragonda, was a bit of a messy character with how she encouraged her students to do bad things while being a member of the Company of Light. At least in the reboot she seems to be more, disciplined. The reboot presents things as being forces of light versus forces of dark, but it also wants to say not all witches are evil, no fairy is good. Yet also proceeds to have Faragonda and Griffith destroy Damien's hope, only because his power that they somehow didn't sense to be like Bloom's could be used for darkness. And not Bloom's when she turns into Dark Bloom in episode 7. It's trying to erase some of the straight boundaries to introduce nuance, but so far, it's not been done that well because the whole idea of witches aren't all evil is also contradicted by any presence of darkness leans in the witch's side favor. I think it would have worked better if they presented things as more black and white like in the original and had Damien be challenging the status quo like what they did with Myrta, or I was going to say bring back Myrta, but maybe it's better for her to escape whatever is going on. Now, let's tackle one of the biggest issues with the reboot's writing. Not really surprising considering that if you've been on Twitter for more than a second, you would have seen how many people were getting fed up with the trailer's overuse of "it's not just da-da-da, it's da-da-da." And it only becomes worse from here. So I don't mind the use of slang because the original already had that, but I don't think it's used right. For example, when we have tense moments, we still have characters talking like this. In the case of episode 2, Stella telling her worried Bloom before she passes the test that her being a witch is...
That is so not happening.
It's something that can be tolerated because Stella is a character I can see do that. But you have episode 10 when Darcy tells Stella...
Unforge, turns out that she has to give it up willingly, which she will do to save her friend. Okay, just like, don't move.
I think it might or might not have to do with her character seeming softer in the reboot or just because she is on her own this time, but she has been able to deceive Stella so far, so it feels out of place. And then you have Bloom's dialogue in episode 13 or 12 after she has reunited with her friends and is telling them that Damien is not Vexia's son but her brother's. She says, and I quote,
"But he still gave half of the dragon flame to Vexius, who, by the way, is totally not his father."
Overall dialogue was already here, but this line feels so out there. There are some dialogues that are outright contradicted by events, such as Griselda's in episode 4 saying everything is allowed so long as you don't hurt the others, but then she's ready to disqualify Winx because...
That is inconsequential. As I previously explained, everything is allowed. All that matters is that the time is up. So Bloom and Flora, you fail.
Huh?
I'll get into the details of this later. Then we also have Faragonda telling Bloom after she'd freed the alpacas and that they'd run to her and follow them to bring them to the magic dimension, that the problem isn't what she did, but if she did it for the good reasons. I'm sorry? The heck is this supposed to mean? It feels like this line is trying to sound deep, but it's applied to the wrong scenario, like the infamous.
We know this isn't easy, but hard things never are.
We also have repetitive dialogue such as Bloom's narration telling us that
Now I'm here at the Althea School for Fairies, trying to find a way to fit into this awesome new world. I mean, magic exists here, and I came to learn it.
over here. Well, yeah, we can guess that you would learn magic in a magic school. Or this one.
Sounds improbable, because it won't work. It's
Yeah, Musa, we got it the first time. Or
Really? Yeah, you're scowling. You always scowl when something's wrong.
Or
Tell us. Or there's a 63% chance I will write shipfic.
look, I could go on and pick apart entirely every single line spoken in the reboot to point out to their issues, but I think you get the big idea. What makes it worse is that characters don't feel like they have their own personality because of this. It doesn't feel like they have their own way of speaking, and that's bad. To be fair, there are some lines that got me to laugh.
Take me? You're trying to capture me.
No, that's not what we... Actually, yes, it is.
You tricks are as useless as Damien.
Well, that was hurtful.
Welcome to my life.
But now, I'll get to a section where I might, hopefully, deliver a more nuanced take than just complaining about the reboot's writing issues. The characters. So, how is Bloom in the reboot? Well, let's say, it's better than what happened in the last decade. This version of Bloom feels a lot softer than our usual fiery pumpkin protagonist, but that's not really the issue I take with her. It's obvious the reboot is trying to show her going from a girl who doesn't really feel like she belongs and is insecure to an assertive leader for the Winx. And I think it might be the reason why she does things like leaving the school in episode 2 as opposed to episode 18 in the original, to show that at first she doesn't have much assertance, hence why she isn't as proactive in episode 1 as opposed to her original counterpart. If you've watched other videos, you probably know what I am referring to. Bloom being more proactive or her getting upset about the bag having a purpose, it's very blatant, and even I wrote that down in my notes. That's the main reason why the change in Bloom's reaction faced such backlash, but I will admit that some criticism I saw went overboard. Like, no guys, I don't think the writers were trying to shame people who are adults and still have plushies just because Bloom refused it, deeming herself too old for it. Let's not dwell into that type of rhetoric. Bloom's softer reaction seems to be linked to how the reboot wanted to make her seem more like the type of girl who worries about being a burden to others, which might further explain why she doesn't tell her parents where she's going, and that her rejecting the plush is to assert that she is an adult even if episode 2 will disprove this idea, as she goes back home right away. And I guess that her parents try to give her the reassurance that they indeed don't view her as a little girl anymore. The problem though is that because of the pacing, no one is going to understand that. On the contrary, if the reboot wanted to go further, they should have taken even more time to establish things. For instance, the original and the reboot have a different approach that isn't limited to a more fiery Bloom as opposed to a softer Bloom. It's also in terms of show versus tell. Look, I know that tons of people on the internet worship show don't tell and don't seem to know what it actually means, but the reason why it worked for the original was because it informed of Bloom's motivations. Reboot Bloom tells us that she is a normal girl trying to fit in, but we spend so little time in Gardenia, we have never an occasion to see her interact with her usual environment and see why she struggles to fit in. In the original, however, we are able to see that we see how Bloom's daily life is, and most importantly, the conflict of wanting to be seen as an adult despite having quote-unquote childish interests like fairy tales informed of her motivations and explains why she wants to take the opportunity of going to Althea, because she can gain her independence while fulfilling her dream as a little girl. That is simple, it's enough to resonate with your audience. Because the original took time to show that Bloom was your average girl who wants to have fun with her friends, be taken seriously by her parents, a bit of a fairy tale nerd, and had enough courage in her to help Stella even though she had no chance against magic creatures, it was very easy to get the essence of a character in 5 minutes. That she is a kind-hearted girl who can be a bit fiery and a bit of a hothead, but she always means well. After all, it's not like she tells her parents that their gifts suck. She still accepts it and goes to try it with Kiko, so she has enough self-awareness to realize that she can't just say something like this. The reason why it disappoints her is the impression to never be taken seriously, and becoming a fairy is the occasion for her to leave the nest and get her own wings. In other words, to fulfill the objective that she has established, her desire. But the issue with Reboot Bloom is that we don't know what her motivations are, and if her remark on not needing Kiko is more about not wanting to be a burden than the coming of age aspect of it, this would be completely lost on us. And the reason why we don't see the reason why Bloom wants to go to Althea is because they rushed that part out. We aren't even sure that the portal led Bloom to Althea because we didn't see anything. Whereas in the original, she and Stella took the time to get to know one another and befriend. She has the time to see Althea for the first time, and so we can learn of Bloom's feelings towards the perspective of being a fairy. So as a result, when we get to the Bloom fearing she might be a witch, the stakes are lower. By episode 18, Bloom had legitimate reasons to hate witches, since the tricks had been playing mind tricks on her and the other girls since episode 2. She got frozen, attacked several times, framed, and lied to by the witches. It's very obvious why the idea of being a witch herself would bug her. Moreover, the tricks made Bloom believe she'd be taken over by the witches who destroyed her kingdom, even if she didn't know that yet, when she fulfilled her dream of becoming a fairy. And this happened right as she was processing the fact that she had been adopted. She didn't know her true origins, and she felt a bit lost as to what to think. So when she, on the top of that, discovered that the person she fell in love with and whom she trusted lied to her from the very beginning, it was the last straw. It made her think, I thought I was strong enough to face all this, but in reality I can't do this. I'm still a chick, I need to run to Papa Bird and Mama Bird. And the fact that we saw this unfold when Bloom was seemingly able to overcome other trials that the tricks put her through really makes this even sadder, because it makes you realize that she reached her breaking point. Then no wonder Bloom was my favorite. The reboot is trying to achieve this, but without the same emotional baggage. Given Bloom doesn't want to seem like a burden, the reboot could have made the argument that she wants to be a fairy because fairies helps people, whereas witches only cause trouble. After all, there were many instances in just episode 1 to make that point with scenes at Althea. This happened in the background, but we can see fairies practicing magic and flying. We see fairies turning into horses while the witches create snakes or a carnivorous plant. And when Bloom is with Flora and Stella, they are also performing magic. We also have the whole plot that happens with the pink alpacas, with Bloom seeing the tricks, sends them to Earth, while the fairies are the one who save the day. This could very well give her the impression that being a witch is less preferable to being a fairy because of their harming people while fairies help people. The thing is, it's in one episode as opposed to the original who took the time to develop this. Because again, the reboot is trying to tell us that, while also presenting Flora telling Bloom that not all witches are evil. Not to mention that we do see a fire fairy who, according to the tricks, keeps setting bushes on fire. And while the idea that Bloom fears to harm others because her powers are difficult to control is interesting, this also means that even as a fairy, there wouldn't be any more guaranteed that she wouldn't be a burden, although I suppose that she wouldn't want to do it willingly. In essence, her motivations don't seem to make her want to be specifically a fairy when you watch episode 1. And so, when you get to episode 2, her leaving feels way too early, even for someone who really doesn't want to harm anyone and just got a vision of her doing just that. In fact, given how episode 1 starts with her hands being set on fire accidentally, and then we also see a fire fairy set the brush on fire, which by the tricks comments seems to be a common occurrence, even if she doesn't try to harm anyone, she could still represent a potential danger to the people on Earth, witch or not. Obviously, Bloom isn't thinking rationally when she leaves, but the fact she immediately goes to school, as if she never left instead of returning home directly is, well, a choice, let's say. Now, I suppose that the idea was that she wasn't ready to face her parents. Okay, do you see my issue? It's how wishy-washy the whole thing is handled, where I both understood what they wanted to do, but at the same time it just doesn't work. I feel that if they took more time to establish Bloom's character, it wouldn't be so off-putting. On that note, I feel like the reboot could have pulled this one off better if they had tried to paint Bloom's sadness over leaving as feeling sad because she started to feel in her place at Althea, and now she has to leave people she felt like she was going to become friends with, but she didn't really got to know them, including Sky since she has to be included, because Bloom's line seems to imply that this is what makes her sad, but the song in the background contradicts this idea because of the lyrics. And even she contradicts this when she says that she doesn't feel like she belongs here anyway. Not to mention Sky, but this will be discussed later on, don't worry. The thing is, with this episode and the previous one, the things they make Bloom do to feel bad about herself are not really convincing. In the case of the alpacas, Damien told her one thing and she still found a way to not listen to him. It would have seemed less weird if she did it after she tried to tell Damien that she was worried about the pink alpacas because of how the necklace looks too tight, and he wouldn't listen to her while being rude about it. Because there she would have a reason to listen to Icy, even if the whole setup would need to be revoked. Look, I'm sorry if this sounds messy, but I've been trying to brainstorm these ideas while watching, and my notes were a mess. I did like the fact that Bloom's reaction with this situation resembled how she was in episode 1 of season 1, because it did give the impression that she had a stake in doing this, to repair a mistake, and therefore she'd be more proactive. But the fact that this happens in episode 1 before she leaves in episode 2 doesn't really help the reboot's case, especially seeing the struggles they put her through. That's basically the issue I wanted to tackle with the Griselda line, and the reboot making a lot of characters appear as unnecessarily mean to Bloom, or her making a mistake that doesn't make sense in character. For instance, in the classroom she needs to be told to find a seat. Thank you, Aisha, but I think Bloom is familiar with the concept of school since she has been there. Plus, the moment where Whiskey arrives and they all stand up shows that Bloom is scribbling in her book, but why and what? She didn't seem to have a specific thing in mind that would make her in this daydreamy state. The worst part is that they could have given her a reason to feel that way if they had just switched her meeting up with Sky and going to Whiskey's class. Something about her scribbling about him in her journal, or feeling down he has a girlfriend, just something. This might sound like an insane trend, but when everything is clearly intended by the show itself to mean something and progress the plot, it's necessary to point it out. It really feels like the storyboard was very messy, and sometimes that even switched some places from the storyboard to the final result. The thing is, I think that the reboot has ingredients to make it work, but they don't use them well. It's like how she returns to Gardenia twice, but instead of taking the opportunity to show us what's a normal day in Gardenia, and therefore informs of Bloom's motivation and feeling like she never fit as she confessed to Icy, we just move on. Reboot Bloom has potential, but she gets wrecked by the pacing, and she isn't the only victim. See, the thing about Bloom's conflict and how her parents don't seem ready to accept she's growing up was also helping characterize them. Mike appeared as this skeptical father who can't bring himself to see Bloom as anything else than his baby girl and doesn't understand her the best, while Vanessa doesn't always take Bloom seriously, but she tries to understand her and to be a bridge between her and her husband. So by the time episode 1 is over, we also notice an evolution in Mike and Vanessa's characters in being ready to let her go because they think that's what's best for her, even if they worry about her and that even Bloom is a bit hesitant. But because of this conflict being overcome, even if it's simple, this gives us enough of an emotional impact when she leaves for Althea. This impact is present in neither the first time they part nor the second one. I think they could have tried to pull a Madoka Kaname by having Bloom feel worried she's just an average girl and wanting to feel special. Madoka felt that way, so when she met Mami, even one fight was enough for her to consider becoming a magical girl because all she was seeing was Mami helping people, And while she thinks of herself as average, Madoka is an incredibly sincere and kind person who doesn't seem to think that highly of herself. So it's no wonder she'd want to embrace the life of magical girl if she thinks it can make her help others. The reboot could have easily done that. I've already mentioned how. If it just took more its time with its pacing, it could have presented more properly Bloom viewing fairies as what she wants to be because they help people, while witches only cause trouble. Even if it's simple, it worked better, and if need be, introduce the coming of age aspect differently, since we deviated too much from this being Bloom's main motivation due to the change of the bike's narrative function. That's really a ripple effect, huh? Incredible how one small change completely modifies a character's motivation. That being said, I do like that they present this Bloom as more reserved when it comes to acting like the leader. I will admit that when she asked if she can lead the transformation, it was cute. And I did like the idea for episode 6 where she gets to show what she can do with one magic. But I think that overall her character arc is a bit too rocky this time around. Hopefully, by the time we get the rest of the reboot, they managed to smooth that. Stella is a bit lacking compared to her original counterpart, and I think it has more to do with the fact that her relationship with Bloom doesn't feel like the same at all. They seem to have switched the spot of best friend to Flora instead, but I'll explain my problems about this later on. I don't think she's necessarily devoid entirely of substance, like some people claim, and they use the fashion gang more reasonably than in Season 5 onwards, so it's a win there. But she doesn't really have the same charm as Stella, who came as a bit of a diva but well-meaning and entertaining. And it's not that the reboot doesn't give her some moments, like for example in episode 3, it's short, but it was clever. It's when she cast a spell to block the enemy's way. It seemed that they wanted to go back to Stella's having insecurities about being only seen as the pretty girl, and rather than being already divorced, she has to deal with her parents being on the verge of divorcing, so she tries to do everything she can do to not make things worse, putting some pressure on her. That's not a bad idea at all, but the way they bring it up is a bit clumsy. For example, when Stella realizes that the ring disappeared, she immediately comments that her parents fight enough as is, so she must get it back.
Someone snuck into my room and stole my ring! It's a family heirloom! My parents fight enough as it is. I can't imagine what they'll do after this.
That's not bad, but it's not very subtle. So compared to stuff like Stella talking about her parents during the Day of the Rose, it feels like it's coming out of nowhere. I feel like it would have worked a lot better if Stella was being very pushy about getting her ring back, kinda how she was in Season 2 when they had to save Brandon, and at some point, she gets her heart-to-heart moment where she reveals why exactly she treasures the ring so much. Possibly when they are tracked by Icy and she begins to feel guilty for dragging her friends into this mess. When they are freed and Bloom transforms for the first time, Bloom hands the ring and Stella hugs her because she was worried and eventually opens up about how she wanted to get it back because she didn't want to worsen the situation with her parents fighting and how the idea of them splitting up terrifies her. But since we are on the topic of Stella's parent issues, it seems people really didn't like the direction they took with Radius. So for context, episode 9 of Winx pulls a season 5, season 8 possibly mixed with that one episode where the Trick sends an incubus to terrorize the Winx. So some people made it seem like Radius had been turned from a loving father to a raging, misogynistic man, but then you watch the episode and it's just Stella's nightmares. Now, I did see people argue that even then it was sad that Stella would see her father like this when in the original they were very close, and I hate to take the reboot side, but that's what anxiety does to a person. It makes you have these contradictory feelings where you get along very well with someone, but deep down there is an unreasonable fear that lingers. Now, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think Season 8 actually did this point better. She and Tommy are fighting for the Star of Confidence, but Stella's vision about her parents is overwhelming her and she just falls. That was actually good, and I would know because Season 8 had nothing good going on for it outside of that, and maybe Icy focused episodes.
Was it really so terrible to take a tour of the magic universe in my company?
Of course it was terrible!
Okay, and this too, that was funny. I think the downside mainly comes from the fact that it rushes the way the girls overcome their fears, so when Stella ends up standing up to the illusion of her father, it doesn't seem satisfactory, as opposed to, let's say, Season 3, where Stella has a whole episode turned into a monster, realizes that people like her for who she is and not just because she's pretty, and then when she has to pass the test, it's showing how she understood that. I feel like they could have done so much more. For example, showing Stella doesn't like fights because it's reminding her of her parents fighting. I don't know. Now, one thing I did enjoy out of episode 10, even if it was kinda rushed, was the idea of her worrying for a relationship with Brandon. I guess in the OG, Radius loved his daughter so much he wouldn't mind her dating the squire of the Prince of Heraklion instead of the prince himself, but the idea has some potential. Plus, it introduces tensions that aren't about stupid love triangles. Season 4 traumatized me. It's just that they don't do anything with it. It just kinda solved in the episode and it doesn't really feel satisfactory. I also really miss her friendship with Bloom in general. Okay, so Reboot Flora is very weird because she has a lot of screen time but they don't do anything substantial with it. For example, they changed her to be with Stella when they found Bloom, but her addition doesn't really add anything new. And with the reboot rushing things, it only makes it seem, I don't know, random. It seems she's more assertive than she was back in Season 1, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but she doesn't have much going on, honestly. Heck, even in the episode dedicated to Nightmare, her biggest fear was portrayed as not being able to help the plants. I guess it's meant to reflect on how she's so caring she fears to not be able to help, but if so, it's also pretty rushed when she doesn't seem to have a solution, which affects all the other girls, but oh well. The reboot seems to have chosen to focus more on her friendship with Bloom, but honestly, I don't see the vision because most of the time, their dynamic is just Bloom feeling gloomy and Flora consoling her and hugging her, and this happens so much that it gets to a point where you start to not take Bloom's issues too seriously anymore, and it feels like Flora is just passive rather than supportive. That's not good. I don't think her dynamic with Damien is as bad as some people claim it is, but I really don't see the vision with this ship. And it doesn't have much her character, no is I would argue, but I have a Damien section, so wait till we get there. I really miss a lot of stuff about old Flora, like how she was caring but also a bit clumsy with her trying to experiment with plants. I remember this one episode of Season 1 where her plants go wild and this causes tension in the group, so having her have an episode where she gets to shine was pretty nice. And it was a fun dynamic since you would expect the Techno Fairy to come up with inventions that causes chaos. Not the Nature Fairy, but it's an aspect of Flora that got kinda abandoned with time, and it's sad because her being caring yet clumsy could give ground to explore her fears of not being able to help people properly. Now, as for her relationship with Elia, I won't lie. I was worried that they were going to pull a I can fix him with Damien, but I will give credit where it's due. It's not really like that as much as it is about trying to understand Damien. But it's kind of the reverse of a relationship with Elia because this one mainly existed to challenge her out of her comfort zone, giving her more personal struggles, but it didn't get that much development. Well, that's the reverse here, where Flora is helping Damien grow, but she's the one getting neglected. I mean, to be fair, she didn't really got a lot of stuff in Season 1 or 2 either, but I suppose we will have to wait for a further reboot until Rainbow can get to a perfect balance between the cast. Okay, so Tekna probably underwent the biggest change as she went from intelligent, confident, yet having trouble expressing her emotions properly, to being much shyer and fearing that her blunt nature would cause her to be at odds with people. Okay, so I don't think it's necessarily a bad change, even if I wish that she was less robotic in some of her phrasing. But the thing is that the reboot, at least so far, doesn't do much with this. Tekna, for one, suffers from a lack of screen time in contrast to her main trio, but I will admit, it's not necessarily as bad as in later seasons. Don't believe me? I had to note more things about her in the reboot than I did in Season 6, 7 or 8. That is already an achievement. But the thing is, they do try to bring the idea that she has trouble communicating, but they don't do much with it, which is sad. She really gets more characterization out of episode 9 than most episodes that suggest that she isn't good at communicating. And this is because from this scene alone, we realize that she doesn't feel like people understand her. She is afraid people think she's trying to hurt them with her words. And even when the simulation is over, she seems to be feeling ashamed that others know that she has this type of burden on her shoulders. But again, they don't do anything with it. Maybe I need to be more patient, but I'm also not a big fan of Bloom's lines to Russia Tegna because simply telling someone who has social anxiety that people can be good is not really helping. And I wish I had been more into the idea that Bloom is trying to help in a clumsy way, but because feelings are the thing that matters, it helps get through to Tegna progressively, but that doesn't show. Alternatively, they could have used the fact that Tegna feels misunderstood because of how she views the world to build a more solid foundation for a relationship with Timmy, where she finds someone who speaks her language so she isn't as much on her guard as she is with others. I feel like the reboot is trying to do that, but so far they only have 2 scenes. 2. Kinda similar to Stella, although she has less screen time, Musa has common point with her OG counterpart, but she also feels lacking. I've been trouble to explain what her character traits are. She likes music, is a bit of a tomboy, and she wants to help her dad. That's it. The reboot trailer described her as very sensitive and emotional, but so far, she didn't really behave in a way that suggests so. Season 1 Musa was shown to be very sensitive, which caused many clashes between her and Stella, or even, like that one episode where Stella's teasing goes too far and she ends up walking so far as to reach the place where the witches hang out, or when she slaps Heisty because she can't contain herself anymore, or in Season 2 where she's so worried about Bloom and Stella being alone on a mission and frustrated that she can't help, she ends up isolating herself or breaking down in Riven's arms. But reboot Musa doesn't have that. If anything, she feels less confident and even shyer given how she lets stage fright get the better of her and needs to be held by Riven. I promise we'll get there. But for instance, if they wanted to show her being very emotional, they could have her, I don't know, get overwhelmed by stage fright and then run away and then Riven comes to find her. Something like this rather than what we got. The issue with how they present Stella's backstory also applies to Musa, as her talking about her mother feels very, I don't know, too easy maybe. During the Day of the Rose, we have Musa open up about it, but we also see her spend the rest of the day alone, so even if you felt it was a bit too upfront, this scene alone shows how much Musa has been marked by the loss of her mother. I don't mind the idea that she's trying to help her father with financial struggles since that's been a major issue in her life. And I think having an additional pressure on her dream can lead to interesting things, but I got the impression they kinda lessened the fact that Musa was also trying to reconnect with her mother, or that it created tension with her father because of him blaming music for her mother falling ill. Because when we get the Nightmare station, we only see the whole financial debacle, although I suppose that having lost her mother because of money problems, it makes sense that her biggest fear would be for her to lose her remaining family for the exact same reason. I don't have much to say about reboot Musa, all things considered, but I hope she gets more screen time. Also, I know everyone already said it, but why is Bloom her co-writer? It'd be pointless to ask about her being the singer because we all know why. But she and Musa don't particularly seem close. I feel like Aisha would have made more sense. Oh, speaking of... Aisha probably got the shortest end of the stick. While in the OG she was introduced in Season 2 and had bearings on the main story and time to shine, she lost a lot of that in the reboot. The reboot seems to try to emphasize her rougher side and present her main issues as being fearing that she would let her parents' expectation of her down. Also, her parents are reduced to be nothing but strict, and they even joke about the fact that she should call them Majesty, and how they never hug her? I don't know what to say. But she also has the misfortune of sharing an episode with Dark Bloom, so her side plot ends up feeling weak and even contradictory. Cause the thing is that Aisha likes to dance, but she wants to keep it a secret from her parents. But the thing is, we see her dance in episode 3, yet when she starts to dance in the corridor, she becomes all bashful about it. She is very confident, so her only insecurity seems to come from her parents, but again, the reboot is rushing things. So you are telling me that the parents that demand she addresses them as Your Majesty deeming some noble soul for dancing in front of her, clearly showing they don't approve of that type of behavior, and were ready to get her out of this school just because they saw her dance? Are suddenly fine after Faragonda's speech about open-mindedness? And even hug her when they normally don't? Yeah, sure. To be fair, it's not like now they changed their mind about dancing entirely. But there is no point in presenting them as the type of strict parents that doesn't give affection to their children and waste on their daughter's life like that, to then have them warm up to the idea so easily in one episode. The fact that they made her parents scold her makes this even less believable because in the original the point was that they were loving but strict, and that despite their love for their daughter they ended up putting pressure on her. So when they came to realize that the arranged marriage with Nabu wasn't a good idea, it felt natural that they'd give up and change their mind, because we were shown that they were caring even if their strict education caused tension. Not to mention that Aisha's issues were more than dealing with expectations. She, above all, felt very lonely and was afraid of being alone. For instance, in season 2, there is an episode where she brings up the subject of Stella's parents, unaware of the situation, and she feels bad about messing up like that and fearing it might have damaged her relationship with Stella. It also feels like her being part of the group from the get-go removes her feeling out of place in the group, which tied further into her fear of loneliness and abandonment issues. So far, this aspect hasn't been touched upon in the reboot at all, when it was a huge component of her character. But also, the Pixies. Aisha making her debut in the same season that introduced the Pixies was also important, because seeing her taking care of cute little Pixies helped showcase her caring side, which contrasted well with her fiercer nature and more athletic hobbies. So I hope they'll bring this back as well as her friendship with Musa. So that's done for the main characters. Overall, there is an imbalance between Bloom, Stella, and Flora having more spotlight than Tekna, Musa, and Aisha, but that's been going on ever since season 5 onward, so...
Will we break the rules again?
Again and again and again.
So... where to begin with these 3? To put it simply, it feels like season 5 onward tricks where their personalities are distorted, like everyone else. Instead of feeling like the clever, assured leader she was in the OG, I see as all the issues she has in season 5 onwards. Same with Darcy, and of course Tommy. That isn't a reboot thing, that's just how they have been for the last couple of years. So what can I say more? I could comment on how they don't feel like threats anymore because of the power scaling being non-existent. In the original, after all, they had some wins, notably getting Stella's ring, manipulating Raven, or the fact that in all 3 seasons her fights with the Winx are pretty intense. But the thing is, again, that's not a reboot only thing, that's just season 5 onwards all over again. I think I got even less to say about them except for some additional elements. For one, I do wish they tried to have more scenes between Bloom and Icy like in episode 1 to flesh out their rivalry. That was actually a good idea. As for Darcy, her personality seems a bit different now. Her voice is a lot lighter and she seems to care more about appearance and boys since she has a crush on Raven. The thing is, we never see them interact and I don't even get how this happened. I mean, in the original that was a plot point, but the tricks were mainly using him. And in the reboot, they don't have Raven being controlled by the tricks as a plot point anymore. At least, for now. And I mean, I think the series made it kinda clear that all of the tricks are only attracted to evil people. Especially seeing how Icy collected so many airs me out. So I'm curious to see what they will be doing with this because so far we have nothing about how she fell for him. And this version of Raven doesn't have the, let's say, qualities that she seems to like in a man, since he really isn't a bad boy at all in the reboot, but oh well. As for Stormy, honestly she got the shortest end of the stick. As always, she has her usual aggressivity and hot-headedness, but I can't say much about her. Although I will say that I don't like how the tricks are able to get away so easily with things, while the Winx are constantly being scolded. I know it must be tiring to hear me say in the original, but the thing is that the Winx and tricks used to be punished in more or less of a fair way, so that side felt like they were getting away with things too easily in regards to another. That didn't always work, but there is only so much nepotism that Strick and Mistress Griffith can do to help these three get out of trouble. And seeing how Faragona is always lecturing the girls for things they didn't know, like the alpaca disaster or the ring thing, that's infuriating, and not in a good way. The Winx could be explicitly telling about what the tricks did and Faragona would still blame them. And then you have Griselda's weird line that makes it clear the writers aren't interested in giving the protagonist and antagonist a fair treatment. Even after Red Fountain is destroyed, with the tricks having partook in it, Griffith says she won't expel them! Why? Season 1 Griffith would never. Also, the whole thing about Griffith raising them is interesting, but they do nothing with it. You should get used to me saying this. That being said, I do like the fact that in episode 9, they also partook in the test. That was interesting to see how their relationship is in the reboot, so that was a plus. Now maybe they'll eventually do something about exploring the whole relationship between Griffith and the tricks. Guess we will have to wait for the upcoming spring to find out.
I'm Diaspro.
It might seem surprising that I choose to talk about her now, as she is a pretty minor character in both the original and the reboot, but I have my reasons to do so. That being that if I don't do that, then Sky's section is going to be longer than my own lifespan, so let's discuss Diaspro first. Diaspro in the original was a love rival to Bloom, as she was Sky's fiancé for an arranged marriage, whom we only see as a recurring minor character and become a minor antagonist in Season 3. Then, later season decided to bring her back as a recurring hindrance for the sake of driving drama between Bloom and Sky, because this show has a problem with making jealousy and petty fights the main driving forces when it comes to its couple facing conflict. The reboot decided to go for a similar way, but many fans have noted that instead of being introduced as his fiancé, Diaspro is presented as his girlfriend, whom he dated for 7 months and a half. It's unclear at the moment if the relationship is still forced upon them, with Diaspro being the only one in love, but they clearly want you to know that Sky isn't happy in this relationship, because whenever he looks at her, he makes this face.
Was it really so terrible to take a tour of the magic universe in my company?
Of course it was terrible!
Like she's some sort of embarrassing secret sticking to his skin? Character-wise, she's... well... yeah, that's a good summary of a character now. Season 1 to 3, Diaspro wasn't a complex character either, but it was a lot easier to describe her as snobby and arrogant, although she seems to genuinely care about Sky, and the comics do paint her in a more sympathetic light. But the reboot doesn't seem interested in going that way, and most of the time her affection for Sky is portrayed as excessive and as a joke. For example, in episode 8, Raven and Brandon jokes that Diaspro considers everything about her and Sky's relationship worth an anniversary, which further question what their exact relationship is in all of this, because Sky also tells us that she buys her own jewels, so that he isn't necessarily making her gifts. So how did they get together? Is it different from the arranged marriage plot, or is it just the same plot but they were too scared to have Diaspro call herself his fiancé, so they switched to girlfriend? The difference is pretty important, but before I move on, I need to address something weird I noticed. So in episode 7, when Dark Blooms causes trouble, Diaspro is one of the people who calls her out, and Sky even defends her. But then, in episode 11, right after Red Fountain is destroyed, Diaspro starts to berate Sky and talks about how he should move on with her, only for him to lash out at her. I demand an explanation. Somehow, Diaspro has enough common sense to call out Darkbloom for insulting and belittling fellow students, but she doesn't have any of it when it comes to the school of the boyfriend she supposedly adores being destroyed. The reboot tries to frame it as her being upset that she was appearing as unaware because other people were worried about Sky, but does that mean that she wasn't? See, that's what I mean by the fact that we are unaware of the exact status of their relationship. The newer fans might not ask themselves too much questions, but people familiar with the original show are going to have preconceived notions. They have a frame of reference in mind that they can use to recognize familiar patterns, and the reboot is also aware of that since it reuses plot points carried out from the original and even adapts some of the original's episode conflicts. Even if it's played differently, we will recognize it. So even if the reboot presents Sky and Diaspro as being together, fans will ask themselves if the arranged marriage plot is skipped or not. But the reboot contradicts the idea when using words like dating or boyfriend-girlfriend, or the fact that they had been in a relationship for 7 months, where the original seemed to imply Sky and Diaspro had been engaged since they were kids. And this even though Sky really looks like he doesn't want to be with her, and that they seem to be portrayed as incompatible, which was also a thing in the original. While we don't have a fully detailed law bible on how people at Heraklion are, we can make assumptions based on certain elements. For example, we see that Sky's parents are pretty uppity, and so is Diaspro. That doesn't necessarily make them bad people, but it means that they seem to value rank, wealth, duty, and status. For instance, Heraklion is the only case of a planet having techno ninja threatening members of the aristocracy or wanting to take control of it. Likewise, the Winx mentions how arranged marriage is considered outdated, but some planets still do it, notably Andros, and we know that Aisha had to go through a restrictive education, so we can assume that Heraklion is part of these more traditionalist countries, if you will. That's really not a new thing. I'm sure pretty much every other fan would agree with me on that. So Diaspro's character can be taken as a representation of what people of Heraklion usually tends to behave as, or rather, the aristocracy there. I'll go deeper into this when we get to the section dedicated to the specialists, but we can imagine that Sky was written with the idea of not fitting perfectly into that mold, given how his squire is his best friend, and that he fell in love with a seemingly low-status girl. So as a result, there's little chance that he and Diaspro would have gotten along as a couple. In fact, that one episode from season 2 where she's kidnapped by ninjas makes it clear that she doesn't like dogs. Rainbow might have forgotten about Lady, but I have not! Diaspro is shown to genuinely care about Sky as seen per season 1. She comes to try to save him during the attack, and this even though they probably broke their engagement by that point. But when he refuses, she and her soldiers, well, they leave. This does seem to suggest that she came only for him, and that therefore, since he doesn't want to come, there is no other reason to hurt the other. In season 2, she opens up to Flora about having been raised and performed perfectly to be the perfect princess because of the arranged marriage. So, it is a sense of duty that leads them down this path. And then, season 3, where she's clearly bitter about Sky wanting to introduce Bloom as his new fiancé, feelings that Voltor explodes to manipulate him so he can hurt Bloom because he's still bitter he lost to her parents. That was supposed to be the end of it, until it wasn't. But her reaction does contrast to Bloom. Resentment as opposed to profound sadness, but also the fact that she makes a Faustian pact while Bloom ends up wanting to try and talk to him, even if it endangers her life. So it's not like the reboot can't portray Diaspro and Sky as incompatible, it's that it does it poorly, and that its incapacity to communicate clearly whether this is a consensual relationship or not makes it even harder to understand what we are supposed to feel to the Winx Club encouraging Bloom in pursuing Sky when she's fully aware he has a girlfriend. Speaking of which, I feel like the reboot also failed to understand what was the point of this plot point, but it seems that Rainbow also forgot why they wrote this in the first place for the last decades as well, so I'm not surprised. If you ever wondered why Sky and Diaspro's engagement was cut off the way it was, the reason is pretty simple. It was to give Bloom a breaking point. Allow me to explain. In the original, Bloom needed to be pushed to extremes in order for her to want to leave because they wrote her to come off as a determined person who tries to overcome things as opposed to running away at the slightest inconvenience. So they needed something that would really hurt her. And what would hurt her the most when discovering that someone she genuinely trusted and began to have feelings for was lying to her? I mean, let's focus on why Bloom attacked Diaspro in season 1. She believed that it was a trick from the tricks, which honestly, given how they literally send a monster to play man tricks on the Winx, and that they had been doing this for a while now, I don't blame her for hoping it was that. I say hope because the thing is that Bloom had been worried about contacting Sky since they hadn't talked ever since the last time they discovered she could be a witch, and she clearly had been wanting to talk with him for a moment. That's even why the girls infiltrate the days of the royals. So it's the same issue as the one that had troubled her for a moment, wanting to know the truth. And in the same way she couldn't handle the truth that she was a witch, even if that was a lie, she can't handle the idea that Brandon has had someone this whole time. So it's easier to blame it on the tricks, but the truth she learns is even worse. Not only was Diaspro saying the truth, but Sky had been lying to her from the very moment they met. The one thing she hoped was not true, that one of the people she cared about the most would betray her, turned out to be true. It was the last straw, something she felt she wasn't adult enough to handle. So she returned to her parents, symbolizing her thinking she isn't strong enough to overcome adulthood after all. And that's because this plot point really only existed for Bloom's characterization that it's resolved so easily on Sky's part. It wasn't meant to showcase his flaws as a character, but merely to help Bloom grow as a character. So that's also why we don't have the full side of the story regarding Diaspro. It was simply not the focus. And that's also why Sky's reason for lying are not revealed until season 2. This conflict existed only for Bloom, resulting in Diaspro not only being a minor character not that fleshed out, but also in requiring this plot point to be settled quickly. So even if Diaspro came back a few times, it was never straying from the original objective. Until they couldn't stop bringing her back because now they cared about her only whenever it was time to create ripples in Bloom and Sky's relationship. This misunderstanding regarding the point of Diaspro and Sky's engagement in the original resulted in the reboot thinking it was just there to give Bloom a love rival and nothing more. So instead of learning about it as a breaking point, she learns about it in episode 2, when she had known Sky for a total of 1 day. Also, fun fact, he himself contradicts his own 3 days line when he talks about it being Bloom's first day. So her thinking about Sky, whom she just learned had a girlfriend before she leaves, is so strange. I don't have much more to add on Diaspro since the larger implication of her being just as much as a victim as Bloom have been discussed to hell and back by the fandom, with some of them even directing blame towards Sky or even Bloom instead. So I don't think I need to add anything to this conversation that hasn't been said already about Diaspro.
Leave it to the specialists.
The specialists are gonna be here? When?
The specialists are also a weird case in the reboot. While in the original they tended to be lacking in comparison to the girls when it comes to screen time and weren't necessarily that fleshed out as a result, the reboot seems to want to have them more involved with having characters like Robin being Faragonda's assistant or them having some classes at Althea. For some reason, it also seems that the reboot kinda missed the point of the specialists as they very often show up to help the girls and so far have very few moments of incompetence, when in the original, the joke was that they are called specialists but they aren't. To be fair, it's not like they don't help at all, but their being incompetent was just fun to watch. So that's for them as a group, but as individual characters, here's what I have to say. Let's start with Robin since she'd be the easier one to talk about. I don't really get why she's Faragonda's assistant at all. As a result, she kinda ends up stealing from Griselda's screen time, but she also hasn't had a notable personality. She's fine, I guess. I can hardly comment on Timmy's character because of how little screen time he has, but the few times we see him, he's mostly like a male version of Reboot Tekna. I don't think they tried to keep him being kinda shy and even sometimes a bit of a coward. That isn't necessarily bad, but because I can count his screen time on my fingers and that he doesn't do much, I don't see anything to sell me in whatever direction they are heading towards. Moreover, Timmy being more sweet and shy was a fault to Tekna's being more confident and a reason for her to try to open up to be more vulnerable. And honestly, it's a pity if they change that because Tekna finding someone who speaks her language but is also shy and sweet would make him appear as more approachable and help her open up to him. I mean, a huge reason why some fans think the specialists are useless is because their relationship with the Winx aren't necessarily adding to the characters except for a few select ones. But while in the original, this issue was mostly because of the limited format, making it harder to flesh out everyone equally, in the reboot it seems they struggled to find an equation to use Timmy at all. Anyway, let's move on to the second specialist with relatively limited screen time. Yeah, Riven. Riven is certainly a controversial character, with many hating his very existence and considering his relationship with Musa to be very toxic. And as a result, a thing praised in the reboot was how Musa and Riven's relationship was finally healthy. Okay, so I don't know if it's just me, but I never thought Riven was that bad in the original. In fact, I even rewatched the entirety of the show from season 1 to 4 this year, and I was surprised to find out that he really wasn't that bad. In the OG, I think his lowest moment was Season 1, when he realized with the tricks, and that's it. Granted, in Season 2 and 3 he was still a bit of a jerk, but it was mostly him coming across as blunt or brutally honest, or messing up with Musa. He didn't actively do anything heinous as opposed to Season 4, where he was insufferable. Let's focus on OG Riven for a bit. Season 1 introduces him as a pretty rude and rough person, very competitive and immature, who doesn't like being told to do things and has a bit of a superiority complex. I have no idea how Musa got a crush on him as a result, but with her strong personality and her being more sensitive than she's willing to admit, it led them to clash often. Riven can also be quite spiteful, such as his disregarding Bloom's feeling just to make Sky angry and never apologizing for it, even when Bloom realized he went too far when throwing water on him. And this comes off as showing him as also more sensitive than he is ready to admit. Basically, he comes across as an Ore-sama dere. For those who don't know, an Ore-sama character is a character who refers himself as Ore-sama, a very arrogant way of referring to oneself, and basically similar to a Hoji dere archetype, except they don't necessarily want to be treated as royalty, but rather to be acknowledged as the best. They also share common traits with tsunderes, as in being cold at first but being capable of being caring, making it clear that their blunt or harsh words comes up from a place of struggling to open up. But where the tsundere does it because they don't know how to open up, often due to shyness, and Ore-sama character is simply not used to and is often too prideful to do so. Also, not that is important, the term isn't an official marketing term, unlike stuff like yandere or even tsundere. A lot of dere's archetypes are originally made up to describe a group of characters sharing a common pattern regarding their personalities. You could make the argument that Riven is simply a specific flavor of male tsundere, and most of the time, when however replicate some archetypes, they don't even know what the name of the trope is because it hasn't been coined yet. But back to the original main point, what did Riven do that was so bad in the original? In Season 1, he was a jerk who would argue with others, and generally had trouble getting along with the other specialists. The worst thing he did in this season was not helping Musa when the witches were running after her, and helping the tricks take over. But that's something he grows out of, and it's not like he's purposefully trying to be a joke for giggles. We do see him rescue other characters like Musa or Griffith and realizing his mistakes. What about Season 2? He seems to have retained his bad habits, but he doesn't do anything really bad. And he's more cooperative than he was in Season 1, which does show that even if it's not a full change yet, he started to open up. He's one of the few who isn't worried about the mission because he firmly believes that Sky and Brandon can do it, something so surprising coming from him that it takes Flora aback. As for his toxic relationship with Musa, I don't recall a lot of moments that they had, but outside of seeming uninterested in Musa as they weren't dating at the time, or being unable to pick up on things when she tried the hat, that's it. Episode 4 of Season 2 has him reassure Flora, then he leaves to find Musa when Flora reveals that she's worried too. He even considers urging her before he eventually gives up, with Flora commenting on the similarities. In the episode where Musa has her first concert, you can see his change of reaction once Musa appears on the stage, and he even smiles during her entire performance. Episode 21 is about her learning to trust in him. Yes, they fight, but that's the thing, a lot of the fights they have during this season, we see parts of it, so we don't even know who started it, nor how. Take episode 25 for example. We go from Timmy and Tekna to them, and Musa is talking in a way that suggests a fight, but we don't see how we got there. If anything, this conversation, along with their fights in other episodes, seems to suggest that Musa is upset he's still being cold towards her and doesn't pick up on things. She says as much in episode 25 before they hug. Now, as for Season 3, when they are properly dating, he is shown to be his usual blunt and brutally honest self, and to also mess up with seemingly not believing her about the motorbike. That's it. I'd argue the toxic and messed up aspect of their relationship appears in Season 4, where they decided to reset his character arc to give him another one, and this carried out to Season 5, and then 6, and then 8. I am including 8 because even if Riven is much less of a jerk, and even not at all one, the narrative tries to frame him as being in the wrong for not contacting Musa while he was away. So I'm not buying into the reboot making them finally healthy when Rainbow has been doing this for a while now, resetting Riven's character arc for the sake of it. The whole "they're finally healthy now" has been said about the end of Season 4 and Season 8 already. Now, whether you agree with that or not, it's undeniable that Reboot Riven has a very distinct personality, and by that I mean a much weaker one. The reboot seems to treat him as though he has a similar personality, but he really doesn't. I mean, he still has the blunt and competitive side, but a lot of things about him are a lot softer than OG Riven, so he ends up feeling closer to his Season 3 counterpart or even Season 8. When we first see him, he does his usual no-nonsense lines, but that's it. There is episode 11 where he encourages Brandon to teach Skylar a lesson by winning, but he encourages Brandon. The Riven I grew up watching wouldn't do that. He would be the one challenging Sky instead. He even celebrates his victory. Musa, in episode 5, which is their first time interacting on screen by the way, just looks away and is the one being distant when he just says hello. Like, he's the one being friendly as opposed to wanting to stay lonely, and when Musa walks away, he even worries about her. And in episode 8, where he supposedly reverts to a more traditional Riven behavior, turns out in reality he's just reserved about liking music, and even comes to help Musa overcome a stage fright and cheer her up when she feels down because of the whole thing being just Vexus pulling a Team Rocket. So he doesn't really behave like OG Riven at all. I don't mind that, considering that with Damien it probably would have been redundant, and that they essentially transferred the whole Riven working for the antagonist and growing out of it to Damien in a way. I also do think that giving him a common point with Musa would actually explain better what she sees in him, but that makes him lacking character-wise compared to his original counterpart. Like him or hate him, but Riven was a more fleshed out character than he is in the reboot. I also don't like how they had Musa completely frozen to stage fright with needing Riven to help her, especially since it never happened in the OG. Like, Musa was always able to overcome a stage fright. I feel like they wanted to reference that one time Riven forced the specialist to play in a group to help the Winx gain time in Season 4, but I can't really say it's bad, just not my liking. I preferred how they did it in Season 2 since Riven doesn't need to be on stage to support Musa, and also the reason why I don't buy that drama in Season 4. In the end, this character does little for me since I never felt that Riven was that bad, especially in Season 2 and 3 that showcased how he improved. So to me, he feels bland, but I guess that if you don't like original Riven, you'd probably enjoy this one more. Though I can praise the reboot for resisting the temptation to force him through yet another round of him learning the exact same lesson he learned in Season 1, like what they did in later seasons with the sole exception of Season 8. Second specialist with the most screen time in both the reboot and the original is Brandon. He seems to be the most liked specialist, and I can see why since he has a lot of screen time and he's pretty fun, even if his level of unluckiness would rival that of our Bonfire Emblem. His possibility in the reboot is... well... yeah. You might not necessarily notice it as he does share common points with his counterpart, but despite having more screen time than Riven and Timmy, it's still not a lot. Now, I will give the reboot some flowers since they had a pretty good idea with episode 10 by having him team up with Bloom to spy on Stella's date. That was quite surprising considering that in the OG, we didn't have a lot of conversations, let alone one that lasted more than 30 seconds. And I think that having other specialists try to interact with the other Winx would make it more believable that they're all a big group of friends instead of just letting them mainly interact with their love interest, although I suppose it makes sense given the limited framework. That being said, I also like the idea of exploring Brandon's insecurities over being simply a squire while Stella is royalty. It was already a thing in Season 1, but because of what I explained earlier in the diaspora section, as well as the apocalyptic state of things, it felt a bit rushed. So it was interesting to see it being a conflict for a few episodes, but I don't think it's been handled that well honestly. I mean, even if Stella thinks she can't date Brandon because of her parents, I think that Prince Look as a concept could have worked better if we got the impression that Stella was looking for several princes in hope to forget about Brandon. The episode as a whole was weird because the Trick somehow knew that Stella would be interested in Luke, whereas in the OG, since she was under the impression she was being asked out by Prince Skies, it made more sense. But also, I will never buy that Stella could be attracted to that. Oh well, I don't have much to add on Reboot Brandon because there really isn't much to say about him. I think when it comes to liking characters in contrast to the OG, he might be one of the biggest victims, if not the biggest victim. Now the last one and the one with the most screen time is Sky, Prince of Heraklion. And for once, not a retcon from the time he became a king in the movie in Season 4, and a character I have a lot of thoughts about. So when it comes to the original versus the reboot, Sky's character appears oddly different. In both the original and the reboot, he's portrayed as kind, having a strong sense of duty and leadership, and also pretty humble and chill for someone who's royalty. However, it seems that the reboot took one liberty with Sky that I actually liked, and it's the emphasis on him being seemingly perfect. Jasper comments on this and calls him a Prince Charming. Darcy and Darblue commenting on him being a goody two-shoes. Even the beginning of episode 11 where he loses to Brandon and that Riven comments about teaching Sky a lesson, with him needing to be comforted by Saladin. Note that this moment is a direct parallel to Bloom, whom we've seen struggle and being far from perfect master a difficult magic test. This suggests that Sky usually performs well, to the point of seeming perfect, and that he doesn't take well not performing that well because he's disappointed in himself. And this was actually a good build-up to his lashing out at Jasper and feeling heartbroken by Saladin's disappearance as well as the Red Fountain being destroyed. He lost someone he respected and failed to protect a place he cared about, yet someone is once again pushing expectations on him. That of being the perfect boyfriend, when it's not the right time. See, that's why it makes me so confused as to what is going on with Sky and Jasper in the reboot. Because assuming that he just does what she wants to answer the demand of being the perfect boyfriend, it would have made even more sense for it to be the result of the arranged marriage and his parents expecting him to be the perfect son. But as of now, none of this is clear. What seems clear is that the reboot is pushing for a character being forced to deal with heavy expectations from everyone around him, and trying to fulfill these expectations, which I feel that the original was trying to go for something similar but never committed to it. So 1 point for the reboot. Now that being said, this brings me to discuss the whole engagement thing, since it's the one moment where Sky really messed up and a lot of fans seems to hate him for it, or at least blame him for it. I think the whole deal is a bit more complicated, but it has a lot to do with the Sky's missed potential in the original. For example, let's take season 2. Sky becomes jealous of Bloom's favoring of Professor Avalon and this causes them to fight in episode 10 of season 2. This plot point is brought back in episode 20 of the same season, then Bloom is kidnapped and turned into Dark Bloom for the finale, but Sky's profession of love cures her. Okay, so I really didn't like the way Sky's jealousy was handled, because it felt like he and Bloom never fully got over the issue, and that their relationship wasn't fleshed out well enough for Sky to be the one to save her by professing love to feel deserved. I know some people complain about the reboot having the girl saving Bloom from the curse Vexio spurt on her with the power of friendship, but even if it was truly, it was more deserved than what happened in season 2. Also, that made me wish the Winx too had told Bloom they cared about her in the finale of season 2, not just Sky. Because when most of the screen time they have is Sky being jealous of her Avalon and fighting over it, this certainly doesn't feel deserved. I did see some people argue that Sky was simply worried because Avalon was trying to groom Bloom, but that's really not the case at all. Because there is only one time that this jealousy makes him spy on Bloom and Avalon, and it ends with him and Brandon falling off a tree. Then he fights with her for that one episode, they reconcile after he nearly died, and we don't hear about it until episode 20. That's it! I thought they were going to be playing the trope where that one character gets jealous and it makes him suspicious of the other character, leading him to uncover what Avalon is really up to. But instead of giving this to Sky, they gave it to Tohno for some reason. If they were going to make Sky's love for Bloom be the thing saving her for the big finale, they should have, I don't know, maybe flesh out their relationship, or at least better than what we got? That's what I am talking about when I say that the show gave Sky many things that tapped into missed potential, and I think that to an extent the way the engagement is handled in the original show was also pretty wishy-washy. Maybe that's because the last Silent Hill was tackling the topic of arranged marriage, but I think that in the same way Jasper's status as a victim aren't properly addressed, they don't go the full way to show Sky was also a victim of his situation, even though they constantly make him hurting Bloom a result of his situation and circumstances rather than a character flaw as opposed to Riven. Again, my first interaction with Winx was the first movie, and I think this, as well as the second movie, explain best what I'm trying to say. It's not Sky's fault that he kept secret the fact he became king. It was forced upon him by Heraclean laws, and he really was ready to tell her, but he never found the right occasion because they got interrupted every time. Or, yes, Sky hurt Bloom by retracting his proposal, but he had a good excuse. His father told him about how he stole dominoes at the witches would spare his planet. I'm still baffled that this plot point was only thing in the movie and never a proper thing in the show, when it held so much angst potential. This basically means that for Sky, in order to keep him likable while introducing tensions with Bloom, they took the habit of putting him in situations where the circumstances lead him to do something that results in Bloom being hurt. Notice how I insist on Bloom being hurt? Well, that's because, as I said before, the whole engagement and secret identity plot felt more like it existed so that Bloom would grow as a character rather than as a way for Diaspro or Sky's character to get developed out there. Season 3 is a lot more open about this, considering that Valtor's goal is to hurt Bloom using Sky. That is the same thing here for the engagement, except instead of it being Valtor, it's the writer. Of course, there is nothing wrong with that, that's literally how storytelling works, but this ends up adding very little to Diaspro and Sky's character. With Diaspro, she is a minor character, so it's whatever, but Sky is the main character's love interest. So the fact that he doesn't get more of his own arranged marriage is pretty bad. For instance, see how Nabu is also portrayed as a victim of the arranged marriage, much like how Aisha was very worried by this prospect and didn't want to go through it at all. It's good that they got to fall in love with their parents realizing their mistakes, but we have none of this for Diaspro and Sky. The engagement was never their decision, and while Diaspro seems infatuated with Sky, the opposite isn't true, and it might not work well in the long run given the subtle hints here and there that they don't have enough common points for it to work. This means that Sky's options were limited to either breaking up the engagement and breaking Diaspro's heart, or staying all his life in a loveless marriage. As a result, this meant that Sky was going to look like the bad guy the moment he would break the engagement, since it would reduce Diaspro's effort to nothing, as well as just break her heart since she loved him, regardless of it being because of Bloom or another girl. So that does end up making him a victim, since he wouldn't have to go through the moral dilemma in the first place if it weren't for Heraklion being one of the planets that still prioritized arranged marriage. However, the whole thing about the reboot trying to lean on Sky's needing to be perfect isn't entirely new. The original had some elements that suggested so, even if it's not as explicit as in the reboot. Firstly, we have Sky's parents and Diaspro's portrayal, which, as I mentioned above, seems to suggest that the nobility of Heraklion behaves like this as a whole, so he would end up sticking out like a sore thumb. While his motivation to be kind to him in Season 5, she has little dialogue in earlier seasons and straight up doesn't exist in the movies. For the little spotlight she gets, she seems to also be strict, and what is most highlighted is Sky's relationship with his father. Oh boy! Eren now seems to care about his son, but he really appears as this very strict and uppity father, which really clashes with his son. Like every time I watch Season 2, I am in disbelief when I see Sky dressed so modernly while his parents are dressed in such regal fashion. When I've never had this issue with Stella next to her dad. And if Arender and Samara's reaction to Brandon and Bloom is an indicator, they seem to be more classist, let's say, while Sky doesn't care, seeing how his closest friend is Brandon. And of course I'm going to bring up Lady. While she unfortunately got tossed aside, I found it interesting that Sky was the only specialist with a pet, because this implies he brought her with him, right? So if you're ready to stay with me for a bit, I think the implications are that Sky might have felt at odds with the way Heraklion nobility was, since he is more chill, and so his closest friends were limited to Brandon and Lady. Diaspro seems to be very infatuated with him, which could come from the fact that he clearly treats her well. When she gets kidnapped by Ninja, he goes to save her, and is even ready to switch places with her for the spell to work, and in Season 3, while the party is going, he still accepts her glass, wanting to reconcile. Add to this that he is portrayed as someone who cares about duty, and this seems to suggest that he went along with the engagement even if he didn't want to, because it was how it was. I think that the show didn't really show that standing up to his parents was actually harder than we might have thought, since the next time we meet him, he tells Bloom he broke up the engagement, making it sound like it was something he could have done at any moment. The comics do try to show his side of things, but it would have been nice if it had been in the show. However, I also think that the show had another idea in mind, notably that it didn't want it to present Sky as flirting with another girl while being secretly engaged, but rather as him befriending Bloom, and as they grow closer, they fall in love, and by the time that he realizes that, it's too late as Bloom attacks Diaspro before he got the chance to talk with her. In the entirety of Season 1, every time that Stella teases Bloom about Brandon, Bloom states that they are just friends. Even in the very episode 17, just before the reveal, she still insists that they are just friends. That is obviously just her being shy. However, in episode 21, he tells her that she always insisted they were just friends, with Bloom clutching on her coat. In fact, it's in episode 17 that she tried to tell him she thinks they have something deeper going on. He didn't act sooner because he thought that Bloom just viewed him as a friend. The thing is, in this very episode, right after he hangs up, he turns to Timmy, asking what he should do, and he tells him,
Tell her the truth!
I don't think it's been done that well considering it was obvious they were going to be NDM, but the reboot is also trying to do the same thing where they are just friends, even though it always have these awkward long silent moments where they just look at each other and why do the models look so dry? My point is that the reboot had a very easy way to handle this plot point properly, but they just ended up committing the same mistake, if not worse. I think a lot of things about this plot point would have clicked better if they had kept it being an engagement and made a point that his parents, society, and even fiancé were pressuring Sky into being perfect. We already have him having a sense of duty in both iterations and something he has in common with his father, so this could have added to the whole thing. So he's basically pressured into it and just goes along because what else can he do? That is, until he befriends Bloom and starts to fall in love with her, and begins to panic because he doesn't know what to do. Additionally, if you pushed it a bit further, you could have made him want to swap his identity with Brennan because he wanted to feel free from the shackles of his title and find an occasion to be himself far from home. That certainly would be a selfish reason for lying, but I don't know, at least it could lead to character development as opposed to the Techno Ninjas, which, while a cool concept, is only mentioned once and never again. This would make his reason to fall for Bloom be because he can forget about pressure when he's with her and that she's more honest and laid back than the court he had to live in for most of his life. And if we're to keep his jealousy, it could be justified by the fact that he was mostly alone with having a few friends, so that makes him afraid to lose the people he loves. Look, I know it's very sketchy, but this type of character writing is so common. In fact, they did the exact same thing for Aisha, so I don't know why they didn't commit to it in the reboot. Especially considering that in both reboot and original, Aisha is shown to be dancing when the cats are not there. Granted, you can argue that it would make them too similar, but they have literally been through the same thing. Like, Jasper's childhood was very likely like Aisha's, and Nabu's probably also was. Alternatively, they could have changed Jasper to be a love rival, but not made her engaged to Sky, and include that one plot point of Erendo selling a Rakian to the witches as being the main conflict in Bloom and Sky's relationship, because, again, that was such a heavy thing, yet it's only in the second movie! As you can see, I have a lot of gripes with Sky in general, in both original and the reboot, precisely because I saw so many lost opportunities. I know that Winx doesn't have the time to cover all that, but it was just frustrating to see that the only times they seemed to have really nailed Bloom and Sky's drama was that time he was brainwashed by Valtro and then never again. But the reboot can still try to pull the arranged by parents cards, though I think it's a bit late by now. I don't really have much to say about Dark Bloom. She was very much playfully evil in the original and it doesn't seem like it's that different in the reboot. However, what is different is the context between these two. Dark Bloom debuted in one episode of season 2 and came back for the finale. She is essentially the result of the fake Avalon contaminating Bloom with a virus of darkness as part of his manipulation. This enables Darker to recover part of the codex as Bloom was the only one who knew about Althea's secret library. But then, after Darker realizes he needs the Dragon Flame to activate the codex, he decides to abduct Bloom and turns her into Dark Bloom, presumably permanently to use her to get the codex power. So as you can see, she ends up playing quite an important role for season 2 and has overall a lot of Darker implications considering her creation. In the reboot, however, she's handled differently as Vexius, fed up with the tricks and Damien's repeated failure at stealing Bloom's power away from her, decided that they should instead corrupt her so that they can use her as a weapon. In theory, this would have been a good plan, but because it's only episode 7, he is obviously going to fail and move on to another plan, which he in fact does. This further questions what his actual aim with the Dragon Flame was, because if he just needs to control someone who has it, it's different from having the flame himself. Damien manages to lure Bloom away and Vexius corrupts her. Now, I'll admit I wasn't too big on this episode because all that Dark Bloom does is push people and be mean, when in season 2, she gave Darker the last part of the codex and essentially doomed everyone. I do wish Bloom had felt more guilty about that, because this was a huge mess up, so I did appreciate the little bit about Bloom still being worried about Sky thinking she was genuinely evil in the next episode. I don't know if they will bring her back eventually, but it'd be a pity if she's there only for one episode. although I doubt they do that. And as I mentioned in the Sky section, I'm fine with her being cured by the power of friendship because it's literally the power of love that gives her the strength to heal herself in Season 2. One of the issues I had with Season 2 was how Daphne kinda felt out of relevance after Season 1, especially as Bloom was looking for her parents. I know Bloom is looking for answers, but I've always found it weird that she'd rather turn to Avalon and not Faragonda. I'll go deeper into this when I get to Daphne, but I think an interesting angle could have been to show that Faragonda tries to discourage Bloom from seeking the truth in order to protect her and help her move on, but she can't accept it, and Evils feels lonely now that she can't contact Daphne anymore. And in this situation, Avalon would appear as the only person willing to help her in her research, and even offering to help her enter in contact with Daphne again. This could work around the theme of Bloom becoming so devoted to her search of the past that she neglects her present. After all, Season 2 made it clear she wasn't neglecting only her relationship with Sky, but also Lockett and Kiko, and even her friends, as Tekna started to worry about what type of creature Avalon was. It could be interesting to have a Bloom who is so focused on what she doesn't know, and that she has lost forever that she forgets about the present moment. I think that Season 2 has this element, but it's a pity that Daphne gets forgotten, as she could have added into this. And this would enable further Avalon to softly remove Bloom away from her friends to keep her under his thumb. As a result, an angle I wish had been explored was that Dark Bloom wasn't just the result of Darka's manipulation, but also a representation of Bloom's darker side, such as her despair that her real family had forever been lost, and she can never get to properly know them, or fear of abandonment and loneliness, in short a weakness, something she has in her, but is ashamed to express, which, in turn, would make it have a lot more sense that she needs love in order to be saved from this state. The one thing I am disappointed with about the reboot is that they didn't take advantage of Dark Bloom's existence to have the hole, which should not happen there. After the Dark Bloom incident, instead of guessing it was Vexus doing, the Dark Aura is so powerful that they barely managed to bring Bloom back to her senses, and they start to ponder on the possibilities they might have made a mistake. After all, it's not fair that Damien has a dragon flame, yet is capable of light and darkness, while Bloom doesn't have that at all. By that point, Bloom would have been praised for her leadership skills in the previous episode, so the news shaking her would have made more sense, honestly.
Oh boy, my favorite seat! Excuse me, do you mind?
She got down dirty. Really no better way to say it. That doesn't surprise me considering that Season 5 retconned a sacrifice, her biggest character moment, for the sake of a happy ending. I guess that Bloom saving her planet wasn't good enough. In the OG, she is a voice that Bloom hears for the first time in episode 6, and ever since haunts her dream. She starts to search for her, which starts to introduce progressively the questioning of Bloom's true nature, and it manifests physically with a transformation hard to control, and a sing a dancer has been Daphne. A consistent thread, pretty well done. In the reboot down! Oh boy. When Bloom is searching for documents to get to Cloud Tower, she hears a voice and picks up a book about domino. She is scolded by Griselda under the pretense that she entered a zone of the library that's forbidden. But that's not well shown, considering that no one would have guessed that if she didn't point it out. As opposed to the original, where some of the books about Daphne were kept away by a door in a remote area, different from the other books, and all rushing towards Bloom. And after that, we don't have anything anymore about that voice until episode 7, where she helps Bloom take over Dark Bloom, and then episode 11. It's honestly so poorly done. Bloom hardly questions the voice when it was the main thing that brought her to question her birth and its at her secret nature. The reboot hints at it even earlier than in the original, yet Bloom's quest feels too late. And when she properly meets with Daphne, Daphne doesn't even explain to her that she and Damien are her siblings, nor does Bloom question how she knows that, or how she ended up with the power of the dragon flame. Again, what the OG did wasn't revolutionary. It was just taking time to establish things. Even Daphne gets left out in the other season until season 5. Also, Bloom still thinking she is her parents' biological daughter makes no sense. This version of Mike and Vanessa are also very strange. In the OG, since it was established that Mike was a skeptical person, you could still argue that he never thought that Bloom had powers, since I'm assuming non-magic beams can't see magic barriers. But in the reboot, They straight up tell her they always knew that she had powers and she never asked why they didn't tell her that. I genuinely feel like the way they hint at Bloom's style with Domino truly could have worked if they had taken the time to show Daphne's trying to enter in contact with her more properly, because as is, she has only 3 attempts before Bloom starts to question things. I really wonder how they are going to handle this in the second half of season 9, because this doesn't bode well for now.
You too, Damien.
Damien, the so controversial added character. Yet one of the most fleshed out characters in the reboot. Which isn't surprising as he is Bloom's new long-lost twin brother who shares the dragon flame with her. So let's be clear, I won't cover Vexius because he's so unremarkable that he isn't worth a section, whereas Damien has potential. Honestly, there are a lot of issues with him regarding his insertion lore-wise. The dragon flame is now defined as a power that cannot be stolen but has to be given. This makes Vexius sound kind of dumb because he contributed to destroying a whole planet to obtain this power, and yet he didn't even know that. It took him failing to steal Bloom's power after revealing himself in front of everyone for him to finally check a book. What makes this worse is that he seemingly took Damien because he was a child with the dragon flame, yet he never took his power first. Look, I could go on Vexius, but I don't want to because he isn't worth it. However, this whole thing about the dragon flame needing to be given because of its nature not only makes it even more OP than it was in the OG, but also doesn't that contradict the whole thing regarding Damien being able for light and darkness? Again, Bloom didn't get that when she got corrupted, but somehow Damien does? Whatever. Another issue I have is that this begs a lot of questions regarding Daphne's failure at saving Damien and only sending Bloom on Earth successfully, or how Vexius managed to get only one of the twins and not the other, but I guess we will have to wait. Now that being said, when it comes to his character, it's not that bad. It does feel like a discount version of Ribbon, but even then he is a lot softer, such as his refusal to harm anyone, even when trying to prove himself to Vexius. For instance, in episode 5, in order to steal the dragon flame rather than blindly attack like the Tricks, he simply sent his little salamander to do the job. Maybe it's a little naive, but this does show that he doesn't want to hurt people to get his way, and instead relies on the help of the other creature he's able to communicate with. It's pretty obvious that he feels close to animals. Now, I have tons of questions as to how exactly he came to be interested with them, and why Griffith comments something about him being old enough now to attend classes, but putting that aside for a second, it feels like some traits he has are taken inspiration from Elia. Before you try to kill me, let me finish my sentence. For instance, the lonely side, since Ilya was often shown to be at distance and searching lonely places. I think they took that, but changed the context, so when translated to Damien's character, it becomes bitterness with a hint of being unable to properly communicate with people and feeling safer around animals because they don't belittle him. And Vexius does feel like a recycled Outmoth. It's little no surprise that the way he treats Damien will turn him into someone who believes he can't trust people too easily. And he clearly has an inferiority complex in regards to his power since his father calls him useless and even the Tricks hadn't to this. So him being on his fence would be a result of not being used to be treated kindly. Which about that, I have seen people complain that Damien, even after Bloom tells him that they are twins, and that he saw Vexius attack Flora, whom he is implied to like, and causes to recover the dragon flame, still ends up following Vexius. And look, by no means I am saying that the reboot handled this perfectly, but that is what abuse does to someone. Like him following Vexius, even after what he saw, isn't that far-fetched when he clearly has a grasp on him as shown per the control he has. Again, not saying the reboot did it well, but the way his models lose his color after he gives up his power, and even the purple eyes, while looking wonky, can be read just as much as a metaphor for control as Dark Bloom. So I don't think it's fair to complain that he doesn't immediately stand up to a man who has been belittling him and manipulating him ever since he was young. With proper potential, Damien could be a good addition, but again, I don't like his being Bloom's brother nor his relationship with Flora being romantic. I don't really know what I'd do with Damien in her writing, but if they wanted him to have a similar power to Bloom, I'd rather make him like Voltor, a being created with a spark from the dragon flame, than her brother. So my idea is that the witches would make a pact with Vexius to get the dragon flame, and when they obtain a spark of it, using it to create Valtor. Vexius secretly stole part of that spark to create his own little minion. However, because he was made from a part of a mere spark, Damien is weak and turns out to be a disappointment. And after the destruction of Tohno, Vexius and the witches have a fight resulting in them sealing Vexius and Damien away briefly before the witches and Valtor loses to the Company of Light. And so, either before the beginning of the show or after episode 1, the Trix comes in. I am unsure about what their goal is. Would they want to resurrect the three witches? Or to locate where they are still in order to obtain their power? Maybe they simply try to locate the key to the Omega Dimension, or to open it directly themselves. Whatever it is they seek, a fluke in a magical spell ends up bringing back Vexius and Damien. Now I'll be honest, my preferred idea would be for them to just summon Damien, and for him to be twisted by the abuse Vexius put him through, but he and the witches work together. Since he would have been berated all his life for the Dragon Flame, I guess it would make sense he'd want it, and in exchange, he offers to help the Trix. Another idea would be that the Trix are the one bossing him around like the spirit from the Blue Lamp and try using him to get to the Dragon Flame. I don't know, what do you think? How would you rewrite Damien's background? We finally reached the conclusion. When it comes to the designs and visuals, I have no real hope. What's done is done. Maybe they improve on the animation, I can only hope so. However, I do sense some good promises buried under the bad pacing and bad dialogue, and while the first half of the reboot didn't do a good job in using its ingredients, I hope that maybe, they try to fix things in the second half. Now, I'd like to say a word regarding the controversial answer that Igenius Trafi has addressed regarding the AI allegations. I think people massively misunderstood what the accusations were. The accusations were that the concept's design had been AI generated because of the suspicious looking screenshot. There is, as of now, little evidences that AI had been used for the entire reboot. I did hear about some songs being suspected of AI generated, but I don't think we have enough evidence to suggest that the dialogue or the animation was. Maybe there will be, someday, evidences proving it, or maybe there won't be. But I don't think his answers were very convincing. I think this video asks a relevant question when it asks where are the concept's designs. But it's also an unfortunate reality that Rainbow has been doing things like copying video clips or plagiarism of indie artists. So, as for the reboot fans, I don't think you should stop liking it even if it has issues. However, I did see my fair share of reboot defenders being very toxic. What was it about the EFI fandom complaining that engaged fans were over-defensive? You didn't see the real deal! I saw these reboot defender folks indulge in racism, sexism, ableism, and make fun of fan artists or harassing them for making redesigns or criticizing some aspect of the reboot. If you want to defend the reboot, this isn't how you do things. I know it feels to like something that's very disliked with people complaining that they don't get to be as toxic as they want to because not everyone agrees with their criticism, but that's absolute insanity the way these folks treat Winx fans that didn't like the reboot, or even those that did but just wants to redesign the character like it's a crime. Redesigning is for fun. You don't have to dislike the source material to do it. It's just about drawing your father in new clothes, or wanting to make concrete a thing you wish happened in the show. I don't know, man, at this point I see people get mad over such innovative things because they can't handle criticism. So instead of responding, they'll bark. Just let me ask you, how is what you're doing any different than the Winx elitists you claim to dislike and who hate on everything that's new? I know I'm talking to a wall, but I needed to get this off my chest. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed my ramblings. Also, I hope they bring back Kiko.